Hello, Ranger Screams family. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for your amazing support and all of your comments. They truly mean a lot to me. Before we begin, let's try to reach 2,000 likes and 2,000 comments on this video. Every like and comment helps the channel grow and reach more horror fans. If you're not subscribed yet, I'd love for you to join the Ranger Screams family by subscribing. Thank you for being here. And now let's begin tonight's story. The sun burned mercilessly above the sandstone cliffs as I drove my dusty Park Service Jeep along the narrow access road. My name is Logan Pierce, and I had been a park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park for just over 3 years. Though I'd worked most areas of the South Rim, I had never been assigned to the remote eastern sector near the Little Colorado River Junction, until now. "You'll be fine out there, Pierce," Chief Ranger Martinez had said 3 days earlier, sliding the assignment folder across his desk. "We need someone experienced at the LCR outpost for the next 2 weeks. Henderson was supposed to go, but his wife went into early labor." I remembered the slight hesitation in his voice, the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Something wrong with the post?" I asked. Martinez shook his head quickly. No, just isolated. Real isolated. Cell service is spotty at best. Radio works when the weather's clear. You'll need to check in daily at 0800 and 2000 hours. He drummed his fingers on the desk. Most folks don't like being out there that long. Gets quiet. I wasn't worried. After my time in Afghanistan, I welcomed solitude. 2 weeks monitoring river conditions, checking permits for the few hikers brave enough to trek that far, and logging wildlife observations sounded like a vacation. "One more thing," Martinez added as I stood to leave. "The outpost is near Navajo land. There have been some tensions recently." "What kind of tensions?" "Just some odd reports from rafters. Probably nothing, but stick to protocol and respect boundaries. The LCR confluence is considered sacred ground to several tribes." Now, as I navigated the final mile of rutted dirt road, those words replayed in my mind. The canyon's eastern wilderness stretched before me, a maze of red rock, twisted juniper, and deep shadows. My GPS indicated I was close to the ranger outpost, though all I could see was endless desert scrub and distant cliff faces. The road curved sharply, and suddenly the small outpost appeared, a weathered stone and wood structure perched on a plateau overlooking the canyon. From this vantage point, I could see the sinuous path of the Little Colorado River far below, its distinctive milky blue waters contrasting with the rusty landscape before merging with the larger Colorado in the distance. I parked and stepped out, instantly hit by the profound silence. No distant highway noise, no aircraft overhead, just the whisper of wind through the juniper and the occasional call of a canyon wren. I took a deep breath of the sage-scented air and felt my shoulders relax. This was my element. The outpost was basic but functional. A main room with desk, communications equipment, and small kitchen. A bedroom with a simple cot, and a surprisingly modern bathroom with actual running water. A luxury in these remote postings. Solar panels on the roof powered the essentials, and a propane tank handled cooking and heating needs. After unloading my gear, I powered up the radio and made my first check-in. "Base, this is Ranger Pierce at LCR Outpost. Arrived safely at 14:35 hours. All systems operational. Over." Static crackled briefly before the response came. "Copy that, Pierce. Good to hear you made it. Weather's clear for the next 3 days. Anything else to report?" Over. "Negative, Base. Pierce out." I spent the remaining daylight hours familiarizing myself with the outpost and reviewing the logbook entries from previous rangers. Most were standard reports: weather conditions, the occasional citation for unpermitted hikers, wildlife sightings. But something caught my eye in the entries from 2 months ago. April 10, ASO 200 hours. Unusual sounds from canyon floor. Possible wildlife, but pattern inconsistent with known species. No visual confirmation. Will investigate at first light. April 11, 0730 hours. Investigated area below outpost. Found unusual tracks near River Junction. Not human, not typical wildlife. Possibly coyote, but stride pattern irregular. Taking photos for records. The next entry was from a different ranger. No photos were in the file. Curious, I checked the wildlife observation binder but found no follow-up about the tracks. I made a mental note to ask about it during my next check-in, then prepared a simple dinner as twilight descended over the canyon. Night falls differently in the wilderness. It doesn't creep in gradually like in the city. It plunges, transforming the world in minutes from painted desert to impenetrable blackness pricked only by the impossible brilliance of stars. I sat outside on the small porch, nursing a cup of tea and absorbing the vastness of the night sky. The Milky Way stretched overhead in a brilliant swath, clearer than I'd seen in years. Something moved in my peripheral vision. A flicker of shadow against shadow at the canyon's edge. I instinctively reached for my flashlight, sending its beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing there. Just juniper and sage, their shadows dancing in the artificial light. I turned off the flashlight and waited for my eyes to readjust to the darkness. The night sounds of the desert gradually returned, the soft rustling of nocturnal creatures, the distant call of an owl. Then I heard it. Not from the canyon rim where I'd seen the movement, but from far below, echoing up from the canyon floor. A sound that raised the hair on my arms. It began as something like a coyote's howl, but twisted halfway through into something else. Something that approximated human speech in a way that made my stomach tighten. Not words exactly, but the cadence and pitch of language. I'd heard coyotes all my life. This was not a coyote. I swept my light across the canyon again, but the beam couldn't penetrate the depths. Whatever made that sound was hidden in darkness 1,000 feet below. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay on the narrow cot, listening to the wind picking up outside, carrying with it occasional sounds from the canyon. Natural sounds of water and wildlife that should have been soothing but now seemed charged with hidden meaning. I told myself I was being ridiculous. 3 years as a ranger, and I knew the canyon's nocturnal orchestra well. Yet something felt different here. The isolation was more complete, the darkness more absolute, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the outpost from the shadows. Just before dawn, I startled awake, not realizing I'd finally fallen asleep. Something had pulled me from slumber, a sound just outside the outpost. I lay perfectly still, listening. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps circling the building. I silently reached for my flashlight and sidearm, standard issue for rangers and remote postings. The footsteps paused outside my window, a window I now realized was unlatched. Heart pounding, I slid from the cot and moved to the wall beside the window. The footsteps continued, moving away toward the front of the outpost. I crept through the main room, weapon ready, and peered through the front window. In the pre-dawn grayness, a figure stood at the edge of the clearing. Tall, unnaturally still, facing away from the outpost, toward the lightening eastern sky, human-shaped but somehow wrong in proportion. I raised my flashlight to get a better look. Before I could switch it on, the figure's head turned, too far, too smoothly, until it seemed to be looking directly at me over its own shoulder. Then it stepped forward and disappeared over the canyon's edge. I rushed outside, sidearm ready, but found nothing at the spot where the figure had stood. The rim edge showed no signs of disturbance, no indication that anything had gone over. The only evidence of a visitor was a set of prints in the dusty soil, canine tracks that suddenly, inexplicably, transformed into human footprints before disappearing altogether. The rising sun began to illuminate the canyon, revealing no movement on the steep trails below. I was alone, at least for now, but as I turned back to the outpost, I couldn't shake the certainty that whatever I'd glimpsed wasn't gone. It was waiting. And night would come again. By mid-morning, I had convinced myself that fatigue and darkness had played tricks on my perception. The strange tracks remained unexplained, but the wilderness is full of mysteries that seem less threatening in daylight. I busied myself with routine tasks, checking equipment, logging weather observations, and preparing for a patrol hike along the canyon rim. At 0800 hours, I made my scheduled radio check-in. Base, this is Ranger Pierce at LCR Outpost. Daily morning report. All quiet here. Weather clear. Temperature 78 degrees. Wind from southwest at approximately 5 to 7 MIAP. Over. The response came through with more static than yesterday. Copy that, Pierce. Glad to hear it's uneventful. We've got a group of permitted hikers headed your way. Should arrive day after tomorrow. 6 people, authorized for overnight at Confluence Point. Their permit info is in your system. Over. Understood. I'll expect them. Hey, quick question. I found some notes in the logbook about unusual tracks spotted near the river junction back in April. Any follow-up on that? Over. A long pause followed, punctuated by static. When the response came, the dispatcher's tone had changed subtly. Those reports were inconclusive. Probably just wildlife. Is there something specific you're asking about? Over. I hesitated, unsure whether to mention what I'd seen before dawn. Without photos or clearer evidence, it would sound like the overactive imagination of a ranger on an isolated post. No, just curious. Pierce out. I gathered my patrol gear, water, first aid kit, binoculars, GPS, and sidearm, and headed out. The rim trail extended in both directions from the outpost, offering spectacular views of the canyon and the river junction below. I chose to head east first, following the path that hugged the edge of the cliff face. About a mile from the outpost, I encountered an elderly Navajo man sitting on a rock outcropping, gazing out over the canyon. This was unexpected. The area was remote even for locals, and I hadn't heard a vehicle. He wore traditional clothing with contemporary hiking boots and appeared completely at ease in the harsh environment. "Good morning," I called, approaching slowly so as not to startle him. "I'm Ranger Pierce." The man nodded without turning. "I know who you are. They sent a new one." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "Are you from the reservation? This area is parkland, but I know it borders." "Borders are new things," he interrupted, finally looking at me. His face was deeply lined, eyes sharp with intelligence. "This place is old. The rivers are old. The things that live here are old." I nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. The geology here dates back millions of years. It's pretty impressive." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Not what I meant, Ranger." He gestured for me to sit on a nearby rock. After a moment's hesitation, I did. "My name is Thomas Begay. My family has lived near this place for many generations." He pointed toward the river junction far below. "That place where the waters meet has power, the kind of power that attracts things." A chill ran through me despite the warming day. "What kinds of things, Mr. Begay?" His gaze was penetrating. "You've already seen something, haven't you?" "In the night." I shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure what I saw." "But you saw." It wasn't a question. "Listen carefully, Ranger. There is a creature that walks these canyons, the Dine, what you call Navajo. We do not speak of it directly, but you should know it exists, especially if it has noticed you." "Are you talking about a skinwalker?" I asked, the term surfacing from memories of southwestern folklore I'd encountered since moving to Arizona. Begay's expression hardened. "That word. White people use it too easily. But yes, that is what you would call it." I thought those were just stories. All stories begin somewhere true. He looked back out over the canyon. "The one that walks here is very old, very powerful. It has claimed this territory for longer than my grandfather's grandfather can remember." "What does it want?" I asked, surprised at how quickly I'd accepted the premise of our conversation. "Different things at different times. Sometimes it merely watches. Sometimes it hunts. Sometimes it takes." "Takes what?" "People. Their forms. Their voices." His eyes met mine again. "Their lives." A raven called overhead, the harsh sound echoing off the canyon walls. Begay watched it fly past before continuing. "It is drawn to isolation, to vulnerability, and to curiosity." His emphasis on the last word was unmistakable. "Do not seek it out, Ranger. Do not try to understand it, and most importantly, do not let it trick you." "How would it trick me?" "It wears many skins. It speaks with borrowed voices, voices it has taken from those who came before. It will use what you trust against you." I thought of the strange call I'd heard the previous night, somewhere between coyote and human speech. How do I protect myself? Begay reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew something wrapped in red cloth. He handed it to me. "Keep this with you. Do not open it. It will not stop the skinwalker, but it may confuse its senses enough to keep you safe." I accepted the small bundle, feeling its negligible weight in my palm. "Thank you. But how did you know I—" "Word travels. The Hopi work crew that was here last month, one of them saw something," he told his cousin. His cousin told me. Begay stood with the fluid ease of someone half his apparent age. "I should go. Remember what I said. Do not seek it. Do not trust what you hear in the night." "Wait," I called as he began walking away. "How did you get out here? I didn't see a vehicle." He smiled faintly. "I walked. The old paths are still there if you know where to look." I watched him follow the rim trail westward until he disappeared around a bend. Only then did I realize he'd left no tracks in the dusty soil. The remainder of my patrol was uneventful, but Begay's warnings echoed in my mind. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss his talk of skinwalkers as superstition, yet I couldn't explain the figure I'd seen at dawn, nor the tracks that transformed from animal to human. When I returned to the outpost in late afternoon, I found something unexpected. Fresh claw marks gouged deep into the wooden doorframe. They were too large for a coyote, too distinct to be weather damage, and definitely hadn't been there when I left. I examined the area carefully, finding no other signs of disturbance. Nothing was missing or damaged inside. Just those claw marks, 4 parallel lines about 6 feet up the doorframe, as if something had casually reached out while passing by. I photographed them, then used the satellite phone to call base instead of the radio. "This is Chief Martinez," came the answer. "Chief, it's Pierce at LCR. We may have a situation out here." I described the claw marks and my encounter with Thomas Begay, though I downplayed the skinwalker discussion. A long silence followed before Martinez responded. "Pierce, there's something you should know. We've had incidents at that outpost before." "What kind of incidents?" 3 years ago, a ranger went missing from that post. Search teams found nothing. Then last year, another ranger reported unusual activity. Voices, strange tracks, that sort of thing. We pulled him out when he started showing signs of psychological distress. Why wasn't I briefed on this? I demanded, anger rising. Because we investigated thoroughly and found nothing conclusive. The missing ranger, Colin Whitaker, was known to go off trail occasionally. The assumption was that he had an accident in a remote area. And you didn't think this was relevant information before sending me out here alone? Martinez sighed. Look, Pierce, I know how it sounds, but we've had dozens of rangers rotate through that post with no issues. The incidents were 3 years apart. There's no pattern suggesting actual danger, except now I'm finding claw marks and getting warnings from locals about something dangerous in the area. About that, Thomas Begay is known to us. He's respected in the community but has strong traditional beliefs. As for the claw marks, document them, but it's probably just wildlife. A mountain lion could easily reach that height. A mountain lion that opens gates and walks right up to an occupied ranger station in broad daylight? I challenged. Pierce, if you're uncomfortable, we can arrange replacement in 2 days. Pride made me hesitate. I'd never abandoned a post, and backing out now would follow me through the service. Besides, part of me was intensely curious about what was happening here. No, I'll stay, but I want daily check-ins, not just morning and evening. Agreed. And Pierce, be careful out there. After ending the call, I found myself standing at the window, watching the sun sink toward the western canyon rim. In a few hours, darkness would reclaim this landscape. Whatever had left those marks might return. I examined the small bundle Begay had given me, tempted to unwrap it despite his warning. Instead, I placed it on the table beside my cot and began preparing for the night ahead. I checked and rechecked my sidearm, positioned flashlights strategically around the outpost, and made sure all windows and doors were secure. As darkness fell, I settled in with a book, trying to maintain normalcy despite my growing unease. The generator hummed reassuringly outside, powering the outpost's lights and charging the backup batteries. At precisely 8:17 p.m., the generator sputtered and died. I was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight I'd placed on the table, cursing when it rolled to the floor. Finally grasping it, I switched it on and swept the beam around the room, momentarily disoriented by the sudden darkness and silence. The backup lights should have kicked in automatically. Something was wrong. Moving cautiously to the window, I peered out toward the small shed that housed the generator. Nothing seemed visibly damaged, but without closer inspection, I couldn't determine what had caused the failure. Protocol dictated that I investigate and attempt to restore power. Leaving a remote outpost without electricity or communications wasn't an option. But every instinct warned against stepping outside into the darkness. I keyed the hand radio, hoping the battery-powered unit was still functional. Base, this is Ranger Pierce at LCR Outpost. Experiencing power failure. Generator down. Proceeding to investigate. Please acknowledge. Only static answered. Either the radio relay was affected by the power outage, or something was interfering with the signal. I strapped on my sidearm, grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and toolkit, and approached the door. The claw marks I'd discovered earlier seemed deeper in the harsh beam of my flashlight, the splintered wood almost luminous against the darkened frame. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped outside. The night was unnaturally still. No breeze stirred the junipers, no insects chirped. Even the distant sound of the river seemed muted, as if the entire canyon were holding its breath. I moved quickly to the generator shed, flashlight beam sweeping back and forth across my path. The shed door stood partially open. I was certain I'd closed it earlier. Inside, the generator appeared intact, but the fuel line had been cleanly severed, and the backup battery cables were disconnected. This was deliberate sabotage. A soft sound behind me made me whirl around, heart hammering. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness but revealed nothing except the empty yard and the dark silhouette of the outpost. Then I heard it again. A whisper, just at the edge of audibility. It seemed to come from all directions at once, making it impossible to pinpoint. Hello? I called, hand moving to my sidearm. National Park Service. Identify yourself. The whispering continued, gradually resolving into what sounded like my name, repeated over and over in a voice that was almost but not quite human. Logan. Logan Pierce. Who's there? I demanded, drawing my weapon now. Show yourself. The whispering stopped abruptly. In the absolute silence that followed, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. I backed toward the outpost, weapon raised. This is your final warning. Identify yourself or I will fire. Into my flashlight beam stepped a figure that made my blood freeze. It had the general shape of a man but moved with a fluid, unsettling grace that no human could achieve. Its limbs seemed too long, its posture too straight, but it was the face that truly horrified me, or rather the lack of one. Where features should have been was a blank expanse of shadow, as if the darkness itself had coalesced into humanoid form. The figure stopped about 20 feet away, head tilting at an impossible angle as if studying me. Then it spoke, not with the whispering voice from before, but with a voice I recognized. "Logan, it's me, Colin Whitaker. They left me out here, Logan. They abandoned me." It was using the voice of the missing ranger. I kept my weapon trained on the figure, fighting to keep my hand steady. "You're not Whitaker. He disappeared 3 years ago." The figure took another step forward. "I got lost in the canyon. Found my way back just now. Please, Logan, I need help." The voice was perfect, desperate, frightened, human. "Stay where you are," I ordered. The figure stopped, then seemed to flicker, like a television with poor reception. When it stabilized, its appearance had subtly changed. Now it wore what looked like a Park Service uniform, though still with that featureless face. "We worked together in Yellowstone, remember?" the thing said, now using a different voice entirely, one that tugged at my memory. "It's me, Ryan Collins. We pulled that family from the flash flood in 19. A cold realization washed over me. I had worked with Ryan Collins in Yellowstone, but we'd never been involved in any rescue together. This thing was pulling information from my mind, but imperfectly. "You're not Collins," I said firmly. "You're not anyone I know." The figure went still. Then it began to change again, this time more dramatically. Its form seemed to collapse inward, shrinking and reshaping until what stood before me was the unmistakable silhouette of a coyote, but one standing upright on its hind legs, its proportions all wrong. A new voice emerged from the coyote figure, ancient, dry, and utterly inhuman. "Clever ranger. Not so easily fooled." I kept my weapon raised. "What are you?" "I am the watcher at the river's joining, the keeper of the boundary." It took another step forward, the taker of forms. "Stay back," I warned. The creature tilted its head, red eyes gleaming in my flashlight beam. "Or what, Ranger? You'll shoot me?" It made a sound like dry leaves rustling, laughter. "Others have tried." I began slowly backing toward the outpost door, keeping my flashlight and weapon trained on the creature. "What do you want from me?" "Company," it said simply. "It gets lonely, watching the rivers. I've watched them for so very long." Something about its plaintive tone almost made me hesitate, but Thomas Begay's warning echoed in my mind. "It will use what you trust against you." "You killed Colin Whitaker," I said. The coyote form shimmered. "Killed? No. Transformed? Perhaps. He walks with me now. His memories are mine. His voice is mine." It gestured with a too long foreleg. "Just as yours could be." I reached the outpost door and fumbled behind me for the handle. "I'm not interested in your company, yet here you are, alone at the river's joining, speaking to me instead of running inside." The creature's voice changed again, becoming almost gentle. "You're curious, Logan Pierce. You want to understand. That's why they sent you here, because you're different from the others. You sense the deeper truths." I found the door handle and turned it, pushing the door open with my back. "Stay away from me. Whatever you are, whatever you want, I'm not part of it." The creature took another step forward, now only 10 feet away. "We'll see." I backed through the doorway and slammed the door shut, immediately throwing the deadbolt. Through the window, I could see the creature still standing in the yard, its coyote form now melting away to something taller, more humanoid. Moving quickly, I retrieved the small bundle Begay had given me and placed it on the windowsill between me and the creature. The effect was immediate and startling. The creature recoiled as if struck, its form becoming unstable, flickering between shapes before retreating into the darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. I stood at the window for what felt like hours, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I sank into a chair positioned to view both the door and windows, my sidearm in my lap. Despite my determination to keep watch all night, I must have dozed off, because I jerked awake at the sound of the generator suddenly roaring back to life. The outpost lights flickered on, momentarily blinding me. The digital clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. Cautiously, I approached the window. The yard was empty, the generator shed door now closed. Moving from window to window, I surveyed the area around the outpost, but saw no sign of the creature. Had I imagined the entire encounter? A quick check of the generator shed dispelled that notion. The fuel line had been repaired, not with proper parts but with what appeared to be sinew and resin, like some primitive but effective field repair. A message, perhaps. A demonstration of capabilities. As dawn approached, I finally relaxed enough to make proper notes about the encounter. My report would sound delusional, but I recorded every detail faithfully, including photos of the repaired fuel line. Whatever was happening here needed documentation, whether anyone believed me or not. The radio crackled to life at exactly 0800 hours, the scheduled check-in time. LCR outpost. This is base. Daily morning check-in. Do you copy? Over. I hesitated, uncertain how much to share over an open channel. Base. This is Ranger Pierce. Experienced power failure last night due to equipment malfunction. Power restored. Request immediate replacement personnel and evacuation. Over. A pause. Say again, Pierce. You're requesting evacuation? Over. Affirmative. Situation here is unstable. I've documented my findings and will provide full report upon return. Over. Another, longer pause. Copy that, Pierce. Helicopter currently unavailable due to search and rescue operation on North Rim. Earliest extraction possible is tomorrow morning. Can you maintain position until then? Over. I glanced at the red bundle on the windowsill. Apparently my only effective defense against whatever stalked this outpost. Affirmative. Will maintain position. Request hourly radio checks. Over. Understood. Hourly checks approved. Stand by for Deputy Chief Wilson. Over. Moments later, a new voice came through the radio. Pierce, this is Wilson. Martinez briefed me on your earlier concerns. Can you clarify the nature of the situation without compromising operational security? Over. I chose my words carefully. Encountered hostile entity during the night. Non-human. Consistent with local folklore. Deliberately sabotaged equipment. Demonstrated advanced mimicry capabilities. Expressed interest in acquisition of personnel. Over. The silence that followed was so long, I thought the connection had been lost. Finally, Wilson responded, his voice noticeably tighter. Pierce, secure all entrances and maintain visual monitoring of the perimeter. Do not attempt engagement. Repeat, do not engage. We're expediting extraction. Be prepared for possible nightfall operation. Over. Copy that. Pierce out. I spent the day preparing for another night or possibly evacuation, gathering my equipment, reviewing my notes, and constantly scanning the surrounding area. No sign of the creature appeared during daylight hours, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As the sun began its descent toward the western rim, I positioned myself at the window with the clearest view of the yard and the canyon edge beyond. If the entity returned, I wanted to see it coming. The radio crackled with hourly check-ins, each confirming that extraction was still planned but with no specific time frame. As darkness fell, the intervals between calls shortened to 30 minutes, then 15. Extraction team is en route, came the update at 21:30 hours. ETA approximately 90 minutes. Maintain position and continue protocols. Over. Copy that. I responded, relief washing through me. 90 minutes. I just needed to hold out for 90 more minutes. Outside, the darkness seemed to deepen, consuming even the starlight. The generator continued its reassuring hum, but I kept battery-powered flashlights close at hand, unwilling to trust the repaired equipment. At exactly 2200 hours, the radio crackled again. But instead of the dispatcher's voice, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Logan. It was a whisper, barely audible through the static. They're not coming for you, Logan. They never were. I stared at the radio, every muscle tensing. Base, please repeat last transmission. You're breaking up. Over. The same whispering voice replied. They've abandoned you here. Just like Whitaker. Just like all the others. I switched frequencies, trying to re-establish contact with the real dispatch. Nothing but static answered on every channel. Something was interfering with the signal. Or worse, the entire exchange about extraction had been faked. I tried the satellite phone, but it displayed no signal despite the clear night sky. I was cut off. Turning back to the window, I scanned the darkness outside. At first I saw nothing unusual, just the empty yard illuminated by the outpost exterior lights. Then, movement at the perimeter caught my eye. They emerged from the darkness one by one. Coyotes, at least a dozen, walking slowly into the yard with an unnatural precision to their movements. They formed a semicircle facing the outpost, all sitting in perfect unison like trained animals. The hair on my neck stood up as a new figure appeared behind them. The same featureless humanoid shape I'd encountered the previous night. It moved to the center of the coyote semicircle and raised its arms in a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial. The radio crackled again. Come outside, Logan. Meet my family properly. I left the radio and checked my sidearm, though I doubted conventional weapons would have much effect on whatever waited outside. The bundle Bigay had given me still sat on the windowsill, my only proven deterrent. I know what you are, I called through the window. I'm not coming outside. The figure lowered its arms. Then we'll come to you. As if on command, the coyotes began to change, bodies elongating, forelegs stretching into something like human arms, their movements a horrifying ballet of transformation. Within moments, a semicircle of hybrid creatures surrounded the central figure, each a nightmare fusion of coyote and human characteristics. I backed away from the window, heart pounding. What I was witnessing defied rational explanation, yet it was happening right before my eyes. A soft, scratching sound drew my attention to the door. Claws against wood, gentle but insistent. Then another sound from the roof, and another from the back window. They were surrounding the outpost. "We've been patient with you, Logan," came the voice from multiple directions at once. "But our patience has limits." The scratching intensified, becoming a frantic scraping at every entrance. I moved to the center of the main room, weapon drawn, turning constantly to monitor all possible entry points. The window beside me shattered inward, showering the floor with glass. A long clawed limb snaked through the opening, reaching for me. I fired without hesitation, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The limb withdrew with a high-pitched yelp. Outside, the coyote things began to howl, a sound that raised the hair on my arms. Somewhere between animal cry and human scream, more windows shattered. The doorframe splintered as something heavy slammed against it repeatedly. They were breaking in from all sides. In desperation, I grabbed Bigay's bundle and unwrapped it, despite his warning not to open it. Inside was a small leather pouch containing what looked like red ochre, dried herbs, and something crystalline that caught the light. Acting on instinct, I scattered the contents in a circle around me just as the door finally gave way. They poured in, twisted figures moving with unnatural speed, their forms constantly shifting between coyote and human. But they stopped at the edge of the scattered material, unable or unwilling to cross the boundary it created. The central figure, the skinwalker, as Bigay had called it, remained outside, watching through the broken door. "Clever ranger," it said, its voice now a harsh rasp. "The old one gave you protection, but such things have limitations." As if to demonstrate, it gestured to one of the hybrid creatures, which picked up a chair and hurled it at me. I dodged, but the message was clear. They couldn't cross the circle, but objects could. I had to think quickly. The circle wouldn't hold them forever, and I was trapped in a rapidly deteriorating shelter. My only chance was to somehow reach the jeep and drive out, but that meant crossing the yard, directly through their ranks. Then I remembered something from my earlier encounter, how the creature had reacted when I used Bigay's bundle. It had recoiled, its form destabilizing. Perhaps the contents had more than one use. I gathered as much of the scattered material as I could, stuffing it into my pockets. Then I took a deep breath, readying myself for what came next. "You want me?" I called to the figure outside. "Come and get me yourself. Not your family. Just you and me." The skinwalker tilted its head, that now familiar gesture of curiosity. "A challenge, Ranger? How unexpected." It stepped closer to the doorway. "And what are the terms of this confrontation?" "If I win, you let me leave. If you win," I hesitated, "I'll stay, voluntarily." The creature seemed to consider this, its featureless face somehow conveying amusement. "Agreed, though I should warn you, no one has ever won against me." It gestured, and the hybrid creatures retreated, forming a path from the door to the center of the yard where the skinwalker now stood waiting. I stepped out of my protective circle, acutely aware that I was likely walking into a trap, but staying in the deteriorating outpost wasn't an option. At least this way, I had a chance, however slim. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me like a physical force, cold and charged with something ancient and malevolent. The skinwalker stood about 20 feet away, its form seeming to absorb the surrounding darkness. "So, Ranger," it said, "how do you propose to win this challenge?" I had no plan, only instinct and desperation. I reached into my pocket, grasping a handful of Bigay's mixture. "I'm walking to my vehicle," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're going to let me drive away. That's how I win." The skinwalker made that dry, rustling laugh. "And if I simply take your form before you reach it, become you and drive away myself? Who would know the difference?" A chill ran through me at the implication. Was that what had happened to Whitaker? Was some version of him still out there, going through the motions of a normal life, while this thing wore his identity like a costume? "You won't," I said with more confidence than I felt. Such certainty, it mocked. "Begin your attempt, Ranger. Let's see how far you get." I started walking slowly toward the jeep, keeping my eyes on the skinwalker while remaining aware of the hybrid creatures surrounding us. Every step felt like moving through molasses, the air itself seeming to resist my progress. The skinwalker matched my movements, circling to maintain the distance between us. "Do you know why I chose this place, Logan?" it asked conversationally. "The junction of rivers has power. The Hopi call it a sipapoo, a gateway between worlds. Your people built an outpost here without understanding what ground they claimed. I continued moving toward the jeep, now only 30 feet away. And what about the rangers before me? Whitaker, the others? Some joined us. Some fled. Whitaker. It paused, seeming to savor the name. Whitaker fought hardest. His essence was particularly satisfying to absorb. 20 feet to the jeep now. The skinwalker suddenly stopped its circling, standing directly between me and my destination. Enough talk, it said, its voice hardening. You cannot leave, Logan Pierce. This place has chosen you, as it chose the others. It began to change again, body elongating, limbs stretching impossibly, until it towered over me, a nightmare silhouette against the starlit sky. Your fear is exquisite, it said, voice now a deep, resonant boom that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It will sustain me for many moons. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handful of the ochre mixture. As the creature lunged toward me, I threw it directly at what passed for its face. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The skinwalker recoiled with a shriek that shook the ground beneath my feet. Its form began to destabilize, melting and reforming rapidly as if it couldn't maintain coherence. The surrounding hybrid creatures echoed its cry, their bodies also beginning to flicker and distort. I ran for the jeep, fumbling with the keys as I reached it. Behind me, the skinwalker's shriek became a roar of rage. I glanced back to see it reforming, its shape now reminiscent of a massive, misshapen bear with too many limbs and glowing red eyes. You cannot escape, it bellowed, charging toward the jeep. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. Throwing the vehicle into reverse, I backed away just as the creature reached for me, its elongated claws scraping across the hood with a sound like metal tearing. Shifting into drive, I floored the accelerator, aiming directly at the gate. The jeep bounced violently over the uneven ground, engine protesting as I pushed it to its limits. In the rearview mirror, I could see the skinwalker and its family pursuing, a nightmarish pack flowing across the landscape with unnatural speed. They were gaining on me, the lead figure's limbs stretching toward the back of the jeep. I swerved onto the access road, tires skidding on loose gravel. The road dipped sharply, and for a moment I lost sight of my pursuers in the mirror. When the road leveled again, I looked back and saw nothing but empty darkness. Still, I maintained my speed, taking the curves recklessly, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and the outpost. Only when I reached the junction with the main park road did I allow myself to slow slightly, checking all mirrors for signs of pursuit. Nothing followed. I had escaped, for the moment. Dawn was breaking as I pulled into park headquarters, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. Chief Martinez emerged from the building as I parked, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as he took in my disheveled appearance. Pierce? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at LCR Outpost. I stepped out of the jeep on unsteady legs. We need to talk. Now. Inside his office, I recounted everything that had happened, showing him the photos I'd taken of the claw marks, the sabotage generator, and the circle of red ochre that had temporarily protected me. To his credit, Martinez listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly grave. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring at the photos spread across his desk. I believe you, he said finally, his voice quiet. You do? I hadn't expected that, he nodded. Because you're not the first, but you're the first to make it back with evidence. What happened to the others? To Whitaker. Martinez opened a drawer and pulled out a file, placing it before me. Colin Whitaker reappeared 3 months after his disappearance. Working at a park in Utah. Seemed normal, passed all the psych evaluations, but he hesitated. His wife reported changes, said he wasn't the same man. Eventually he disappeared again. No trace. A cold weight settled in my stomach. It wasn't him. It was that thing, wearing his identity. Maybe, Martinez admitted. We'll never know for sure. But after what you've shown me, I'm inclined to believe that possibility. We need to close that outpost, I insisted. Permanently. That's not my call to make, but I can recommend it, strongly. He gathered the photos in my written report. For now, you're on administrative leave. Get some rest. We'll debrief further once I've consulted with regional headquarters. As I stood to leave, Martinez added, Pierce, watch yourself. If what you encountered is real, if it can take forms and identities, then it might not be finished with you. The warning followed me as I drove to my small apartment in the park's residential area. Despite exhaustion pulling at my limbs, I found myself checking mirrors, studying the faces of people I passed, wondering if one of them might be something else entirely. That night, as I finally succumbed to sleep, I dreamed of the canyon, of standing at the edge where the rivers met, watching as the waters swirled together, blue and brown becoming something new. In the dream, my reflection in those waters wasn't my own. It wore my face, but behind the eyes was something ancient and patient, something that was still waiting. 3 weeks passed. The official investigation into the incident at the LCR outpost concluded with a predictable bureaucratic response. The outpost was temporarily closed, pending a comprehensive safety review, and my report was filed away with a notation suggesting possible stress-induced hallucination due to isolation. I remained on administrative leave, spending my days in a state of hypervigilance that gradually gave way to doubt. Had I actually experienced what I remembered, or had the isolation and darkness played tricks on my perception? The photos showed real damage to the outpost, but nothing conclusively supernatural. Thomas Begay had vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. My attempts to locate him through contacts in the Navajo community met with polite deflection or genuine confusion. No one seemed to know of an elder by that name. Sleep became my enemy. Each night the dreams returned, standing at the river junction, seeing that other self in the waters. Sometimes it spoke to me in that dry, ancient voice. "You didn't escape, Ranger. You only think you did." I woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, certain I'd heard scratching at my window or soft footsteps in the hallway outside my door. But daylight never revealed any evidence of intrusion. On the 23rd day of my leave, Chief Martinez called me into his office. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "How are you holding up, Pierce?" he asked as I sat across from him. "Fine," I lied. "Any news about the outpost?" Martinez nodded. "That's why I called you in. They're reopening it next week. New security measures, additional communication equipment, camera system with satellite uplink." "You can't be serious." After what you reported happened," he corrected gently. "Look, I don't doubt you experienced something traumatic out there, but the investigation found no evidence of anything supernatural. The claw marks, the sabotage generator, could have been wildlife damage, maybe even vandals from the reservation. There have been jurisdictional tensions recently," he sighed. "I fought this decision, Pierce, but it's out of my hands. The LCR junction is a critical monitoring point for river conditions, especially with the drought worsening." I leaned forward. "Who are you sending out there?" "That's the other reason I wanted to talk to you. They're asking for volunteers. No one with your experience has stepped up." The implication hung in the air between us. I shook my head firmly. "No, absolutely not. I'm not going back there. I understand, and I wouldn't ask, except..." He hesitated. "Except I'm concerned about whoever does go. If what you encountered is real, they need to be prepared." "Then tell them. Show them my report. It's been classified. Access restricted to senior management only." Martinez looked genuinely regretful. "They're sending someone out there regardless, Pierce. Probably someone young, inexperienced, someone who won't know what they might be facing." The manipulation was obvious but effective. I thought of another ranger encountering what I had, without warning or preparation. The skinwalker had said others had joined it. How many had been lost to that entity over the years? How many identities had it stolen? "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said finally. "Go back, not alone, with the security team installing the new equipment. Stay just long enough to see if there's any sign of unusual activity. If not, you come back, finish your leave, return to regular duty. If you do notice something," he spread his hands, "then we have justification for permanent closure. And if I refuse, then I respect your decision. And we hope for the best for whoever takes the assignment." I sat back, mind racing. The thought of returning to that outpost made my skin crawl. Yet the alternative, sending an unsuspecting ranger into that situation, seemed unconscionable. 3 days, I said finally. "I'll go for 3 days with the security team, not a minute longer." Martinez nodded. "Thank you, Pierce. The team heads out tomorrow at 0800. I'll let them know you'll be joining them." That night I barely slept, my dreams more vivid than ever. In them, I stood not at the river junction, but in the yard outside the outpost. The skinwalker stood before me, but now it wore my face perfectly, an exact duplicate down to the smallest detail. "Welcome back," it said with my voice, my inflections. "I've been waiting for you." I jerked awake at 0400, drenched in sweat despite the cool air from the air conditioner. Outside my window, a coyote howled, a normal sound in these parts, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. By 0730 the next morning, I was at the motor pool, checking over the security team's vehicles and equipment. The team consisted of 4 people, 2 technical specialists to install the new systems, and 2 armed rangers providing security. None of them knew the details of what had happened at the outpost, only that there had been an incident requiring upgraded security measures. The lead technician, Sarah Chen, approached me as I was loading my gear. "Ranger Pierce? Chief Martinez said you'd be accompanying us." Something about familiarity with the outpost systems. I nodded, accepting the cover story Martinez had apparently provided. That's right, I was stationed there recently. Great. We could use the help. Some of these remote installations can be tricky to configure. She smiled, extending her hand. Sarah Chen, that's Marco over there with the satellite equipment, and Rangers Delgado and Wilson are our security detail. I shook her hand, studying her face carefully, a habit I'd developed since my encounter. Her eyes met mine normally, her smile reaching them in a way that seemed genuinely human. Still, doubt lingered. How would I know if the skinwalker had taken someone else's form? The drive to the outpost was tense for me, but apparently routine for the others. They chatted about previous installations, the challenges of maintaining equipment in remote locations, and the latest Park Service gossip. I remained mostly silent, watching the landscape through the window as it gradually transformed from pine forest to juniper and sage, the canyon opening up beside us. As we approached the final turn that would bring the outpost into view, my hands began to sweat. What would we find? Had the entity left evidence of its presence, or would the outpost appear normal, making me question my own memories once again? The outpost looked exactly as I remembered it, except for the repair work on the door and windows. Evidence of the attack had been erased, replaced with new materials that stood out against the weathered exterior. The yard was empty, the surrounding area quiet except for the call of a canyon wren echoing off the distant walls. Doesn't look too worse for wear, commented Ranger Delgado as we parked. Martinez said there was some kind of break-in, something like that, I said, scanning the area for any signs of disturbance. The team efficiently unloaded their equipment and began work immediately. Shen and Marco focusing on the interior communication systems while Rangers Delgado and Wilson secured the perimeter and installed external cameras. I found myself constantly moving between groups, ostensibly to assist but really to keep everyone in sight. The idea of anyone being alone, even momentarily, made me deeply uneasy. By late afternoon, the new systems were nearly operational. Multiple cameras now covered the exterior approaches, their feeds displaying on monitors inside. The satellite communication system provided redundant connectivity, and a new generator with reinforced housing had been installed. Pretty much state-of-the-art now, Chen said, checking the final connections. Whatever happened here won't happen again, at least not without being recorded from multiple angles. I nodded, not sharing my doubt that conventional technology would be much deterrent to what dwelled here. As sunset approached, I grew increasingly anxious. We should leave soon, I suggested. Get back before dark. Chen looked up from her work. We're still calibrating the motion detection system. It'll take another hour at least. Besides, we're approved for overnight if necessary. It's not necessary, I insisted. We can come back tomorrow to finish. Ranger Wilson joined the conversation. What's the rush, Pierce? Something about this place got you spooked. Before I could respond, the radio crackled. Security team, this is base. Be advised we're tracking a severe thunderstorm moving into your area from the southwest. ETA approximately 30 minutes. Over. Wilson keyed his radio. Copy that, base. What's the forecast? Over. Heavy precipitation. Possible flash flooding in the canyon. Recommend you either evacuate immediately or prepare to shelter in place until morning. Storm is expected to last through the night. Over. Wilson looked at Chen. What's our status? Can we pack up and go? She shook her head. System is in the middle of initialization. If we interrupt it now, we'll have to start over tomorrow. Given the drive time, we'd be caught in the storm either way. Then we stay, Wilson decided. Pierce, you know this place best. Help us secure anything outside that might blow away. I wanted to argue, to insist we leave despite the approaching storm, but the dark clouds already visible on the southwestern horizon made it clear we'd likely be caught on the exposed road if we tried to evacuate now. We worked quickly to secure the exterior equipment and vehicles. The wind was picking up, carrying the distinctive scent of rain and ozone. In the distance, lightning flashed within the approaching storm clouds, followed seconds later by the rumble of thunder. As we finished, I found myself staring at the canyon rim, an inexplicable sense of dread building within me. Something felt wrong about this storm. Its sudden appearance, its timing, almost as if it had been summoned. By the time we returned inside, the first heavy raindrops were beginning to fall. Chen and Marco continued working on the system initialization while Rangers Delgado and Wilson checked the supplies and prepared the sleeping areas. I found myself drawn to the new security monitors, scanning the exterior camera feeds for any sign of movement beyond the expected wind and rain. Night fell quickly under the storm clouds, the darkness outside becoming absolute except when lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, stark flashes. The storm intensified, rain hammering against the roof and windows, wind howling around the corners of the outpost. The others seemed untroubled by the conditions, continuing their work and conversation normally. Only I felt the growing sense of wrongness, the feeling that the storm wasn't merely a natural phenomenon but a cover, a distraction. At 2030 hours, with the system initialization finally complete, Chen joined me by the monitors. All set. Everything's operational and transmitting to base. She peered at the screens. Anything interesting out there? I shook my head. Just the storm, she yawned, stretching. Well, I'm beat. Marco's already sacked out in the back room. The Rangers said they'll take watches through the night. But honestly, with this system, nothing's getting near this place undetected. I wished I shared her confidence. I'll take a watch too. Suit yourself. She patted my shoulder. Try to get some sleep though. You look like you need it. After she left, I continued monitoring the camera feeds, jumping at every shadow that moved in the lightning flashes. Ranger Wilson took the first watch, stationing himself near the door with a cup of coffee and a book. Delgado had already turned in, planning to relieve Wilson at 0200. By midnight, the storm was directly overhead, lightning and thunder now simultaneous in their assault. The power flickered several times but held, the new generator performing as designed. I must have dozed off in my chair because I startled awake to Wilson shaking my shoulder. Pierce! Hey, Pierce! Wake up! I blinked, disoriented. What is it? What time is it? About 0130. Listen. One of the exterior cameras went offline, the one covering the east approach. Probably just the storm, but protocol says we check it out. Instantly alert. I shook my head. No. No one goes outside until daylight. Wilson frowned. It's just a camera. Probably got knocked loose by the wind. 5-minute fix, tops. It's not safe, I insisted. It's our job, he countered. Look, I'm going to check it. You can come with me or stay here, but that camera needs to be operational. I knew arguing further would only raise suspicions I couldn't afford. Fine, we go together. Wake Delgado first. I want someone monitoring the other cameras while we're out there. Wilson nodded, moving to rouse Delgado. I checked my sidearm and gathered 2 heavy-duty flashlights, my heart racing. This felt like a trap, but I had no way to explain my fears without sounding paranoid. Delgado took position at the monitors as Wilson and I prepared to step outside. The rain had lessened slightly, but the wind remained fierce, carrying an unnatural chill. Keep the door locked behind us, I instructed Delgado. Don't open it for anyone but us, and verify visually before you do. He raised an eyebrow but nodded. Understood. Wilson and I stepped out into the storm, immediately soaked by the driving rain. Our flashlights cut weak paths through the darkness as we made our way around the side of the outpost toward the east-facing camera. The wind howled around us, carrying what sounded like whispers just at the edge of audibility. I stayed close to Wilson, scanning constantly for any movement beyond the normal chaos of the storm. We reached the camera mount, which had indeed been twisted by the wind, now pointing uselessly at the outpost wall. Wilson set to work adjusting it while I kept watch, the hairs on my neck standing despite the rain plastering everything else down. Almost got it, Wilson called over the wind. Just need to tighten this bracket. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the light, something low to the ground moving with deliberate purpose. I swung my flashlight toward it, but whatever it was had disappeared into the darkness. Wilson? I said urgently. We need to finish this now. He must have heard the fear in my voice because he worked faster, securing the final connections. Done. Let's get back inside. We turned toward the outpost door, now about 40 feet away across the open yard. Lightning flashed, and in that brief illumination I saw them. Dark figures surrounding the outpost, some crouched low like animals, others standing unnaturally tall and still. When darkness returned, they were gone, or hidden again beyond the reach of our flashlights. Run, I said, grabbing Wilson's arm. Run now. We sprinted for the door, slipping on the muddy ground. I pounded on the metal surface when we reached it. Delgado, open up. The door remained closed. Through the window beside it, I could see the main room was now dark. The power had failed despite the new generator. The cameras, Wilson realized. He can't see us. I tried the handle, locked, as instructed. Delgado, I shouted again, hammering on the door with renewed desperation. Lightning flashed again, and this time the figures were closer, a semicircle closing in behind us. In the brief illumination, I saw Wilson's eyes widen as he finally noticed them too. What the hell are those? He gasped. Before I could answer, the door swung open. Delgado stood there, backlit by emergency lighting. Get in, quick. Power's out, and something's interfering with the radio. We rushed inside, slamming and locking the door behind us. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of glowing eyes reflecting our flashlight beams before disappearing into the darkness. "What did you see out there?" I demanded of Delgado. He shook his head. "Nothing on the monitors before they went dark, but I heard something on the roof. And voices. I thought I heard voices calling my name." Wilson was peering out the window. "There's something out there. Multiple somethings. Not human." "Where are Chen and Marco?" I asked, suddenly realizing they weren't in the main room. "Still asleep, I think." "Back room." Delgado gestured toward the closed door. I moved quickly to check on them, opening the door carefully. The emergency lighting cast a weak glow over the 2 sleeping bags on the floor. Both empty. "They're gone," I reported, cold dread washing through me. "Back door?" Delgado shook his head. "Locked and bolted from the inside." I checked when the power went out. "Windows, all secure." I did a full perimeter check. Wilson joined us, his expression grim. "Then where the hell are they?" A soft thump from above made us all look up. Footsteps moved across the roof, too heavy to be rain, too deliberate to be debris. "It's here," I said quietly. "The skinwalker. It's been waiting for us." Wilson stared at me. "The what?" Before I could explain, a voice called from outside. Shen's voice, desperate and frightened. "Help, please, let me in. It's after me." Wilson moved toward the door, but I grabbed his arm. "That's not her." "What are you talking about? She's right outside." "Trust me," I hissed. "Whatever's calling to us is not human." Another voice joined Chen's. Marco this time. "Guys, open up. Oh God, it's coming closer." Delgado looked between us, confused. "Pierce, they're our team. We can't just leave them out there." I released Wilson's arm. "Fine, but verify visually before you open that door. And be ready." Wilson approached the window cautiously, flashlight raised. Outside, 2 figures stood in the rain. Shen and Marco, drenched and terrified, looking exactly as they should. "It's them," Wilson said, moving to unlock the door. "Wait," I insisted. "Ask them something only they would know." Wilson hesitated, then called through the door. "Shen, what was the name of your first pet?" The figure that looked like Chen smiled, a smile that stretched too wide across her face. "Why are you playing games, Wilson? Let us in before it gets us." She didn't answer the question, I pointed out. "Because she doesn't know the answer." The expressions on both figures outside changed simultaneously, the fear melting away, replaced by cold calculation. Then, as we watched, their forms began to change, melting and reshaping until they no longer resembled Chen and Marco at all, but the same featureless humanoid figures I'd encountered before. "Jesus Christ," whispered Delgado, backing away from the window. The voice that came next emerged from both figures in perfect unison, that ancient, dry sound I remembered too well. "Clever Ranger, you remembered our game." Wilson turned to me, eyes wide. "What the hell is happening?" "Later," I said. "Right now, we need to find Chen and Marco, the real ones." The skinwalker's voice came again. "Your friends have joined us, Ranger, as you will, as you all will." I ignored it, focusing on securing the outpost. "Block all the entrances. Use whatever furniture you can move. These things are strong, but they still need a way in." The Rangers moved quickly, pushing desks and cabinets against the doors and windows. I searched frantically for anything that might serve as protection. Salt, iron, anything resembling the contents of Begay's bundle. In my haste to return, I hadn't thought to bring similar materials. Outside, more figures had joined the first 2, a gathering of twisted shapes moving around the outpost, some still bearing vague resemblances to humans, others fully transformed into something else entirely. Their movements were coordinated, deliberate, as they tested each potential entrance. The roof creaked ominously above us, the footsteps now joined by a scraping sound, as if something were trying to dig through. "They're coming in from above," Delgado warned. Weapon drawn, the emergency lights flickered and died, plunging us into total darkness except for our flashlights. In the same moment, a section of the ceiling gave way, debris crashing down into the center of the room. Rain poured through the opening, along with something else, a long, distorted limb ending in clawed fingers that reached toward us. Wilson fired without hesitation, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The limb withdrew with a shriek, but more appeared at the edges of the hole, reaching, grasping. "Fall back," I shouted. Into the back room, we retreated, using our flashlights to navigate through the darkness. Once in the smaller room, we pushed a heavy metal cabinet against the door, our last line of defense. "What now?" Wilson demanded, reloading his weapon. "What are these things?" "Skinwalkers," I explained quickly. "Shapeshifters from Navajo legend. Except they're not just legend. How do we kill them?" I shook my head. "I don't think we can. Not with conventional weapons. Then what's the plan? Delgado asked, his voice remarkably steady despite the situation. Before I could answer, a new sound reached us. The distant thump-thump of helicopter rotors, barely audible over the storm. Extraction team, Wilson realized, hope lighting his face. Martinez must have sent them when we lost contact. The sounds from the outer room changed. The creatures retreating, their eerie calls fading. The helicopter noise grew louder, now definitely approaching. They're leaving, Delgado said, peering through a crack in the door. The things, they're retreating. I wasn't convinced. Or regrouping. Be careful. We waited, listening as the helicopter grew closer, its searchlight occasionally visible through the broken ceiling as it circled the outpost. Finally, it seemed to land in the yard outside, the rotors slowing but not stopping. A hot extraction. Wilson moved the cabinet aside. Let's go. This is our chance. We advanced cautiously through the darkened main room, flashlights revealing the destruction left behind. Broken furniture, the gaping hole in the ceiling, but no sign of the creatures. Outside, the helicopter waited, its searchlight sweeping the area. Two figures in tactical gear stood by the open door, gesturing urgently for us to approach. Run for it, one called over the noise of the rotors. We can't stay long in this weather. We sprinted across the yard, the rain still falling heavily. As we reached the helicopter, one of the tactical team grabbed my arm, helping me aboard. Where are the others? He shouted. We were told to expect 6 people. 2 missing, I shouted back. Possibly taken by hostile entities. He gave me an odd look but nodded, turning to help Wilson and Delgado aboard. Once we were all in, he signaled the pilot, and the helicopter lifted off, banking sharply away from the outpost. As we gained altitude, I looked down at the outpost, a small damaged structure now receding into the darkness and rain. For just a moment, I thought I saw figures emerge from the shadows again, gathering in the yard. Their faces turned upward toward our departing helicopter. One raised its arm in what almost seemed like a farewell gesture, or perhaps a promise. The flight back to headquarters passed in a blur of noise and tension. None of us spoke much, each processing what we'd experienced in our own way. I kept scanning the faces of the extraction team, searching for any sign that they weren't what they appeared to be. But they seemed genuinely human, tired, concerned, professional. When we landed at park headquarters, Chief Martinez was waiting, his face grim in the pre-dawn light. Medical personnel immediately checked us over, finding nothing beyond minor scrapes and bruises. In Martinez's office, we gave our accounts, Wilson and Delgado describing the attack, me filling in the details about the skinwalker from my previous encounter. Martinez listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. Search teams will head out at first light, he said when we'd finished. We'll find Chen and Marco. But his tone lacked conviction, and I knew he understood the truth as well as I did. Our missing team members were gone, or they're dead or transformed into something that was no longer human. The outpost needs to be destroyed, I said firmly. Burned to the ground. The whole area quarantined. Martinez sighed heavily. That's not my call to make, Pierce, but I'll forward your recommendation along with a complete report. For now, all of you are on administrative leave, with mandatory counseling. We were dismissed then, each to our separate quarters. But as I turned to leave, Martinez called me back. Pierce, one more thing. He pulled something from his desk drawer, a small leather pouch, similar to what Begay had given me. This was delivered for you yesterday, no sender indicated. I took the pouch, sensing its contents without needing to look inside. Thank you. Outside, the storm was passing, dawn beginning to lighten the eastern sky. I stood for a moment, watching as the darkness retreated, temporarily at least. In my pocket, the leather pouch seemed to pulse with a subtle warmth. A gift? A warning? Perhaps both. I didn't know if Begay was real or another form the skinwalker had taken to manipulate me. But the protection he'd provided had worked, at least temporarily. I returned to my apartment, exhausted yet knowing sleep would not come easily. Before I could even remove my still damp clothes, my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello? A familiar voice responded. Shen's voice, perfect in every detail. Logan, it's Sarah. I'm calling to make sure you got back safely. My blood ran cold. Who is this really? A soft laugh. Don't be paranoid, Logan. It's me. I managed to escape during the chaos. I'm fine. Marco too. We're at a motel in town. Prove it, I demanded. Tell me something only Chen would know. A pause. You need to stop this, Logan. You're making yourself ridiculous. We need to meet. I have important information about what happened. Where's this motel? The Pinewood, on Route 64. Room 17. Come alone. What I have to tell you isn't for others to hear. The call ended before I could respond. I stood frozen, phone still pressed to my ear, ice forming in my veins. Room 17. The exact number of days the first ranger Whitaker had been missing before returning. I set the phone down carefully and moved to the window, peering out at the brightening day. Somewhere out there, something was wearing Chen's identity like a costume, speaking with her voice, accessing her memories, and it was waiting for me. But two could play at that game. If the skinwalker thought I would walk blindly into its trap, it had misjudged me. I'd return to the Pinewood Motel, but not alone, and not unprepared. This time, I would be the hunter. The leather pouch in my pocket seemed to grow warmer, as if responding to my resolve. Outside, a coyote howled, a normal sound that now carried new meaning. The boundary between worlds had been breached, and something ancient had awakened in the canyon. Our game wasn't over. It had only just begun. I started my day like any other, rolled out of bed, threw on my uniform, and grabbed my badge. The usual routine. What I didn't know was that this would be the worst day of my life. I've been the sheriff of Montrose, Kentucky for about 12 years now. Small-town policing has its charm, domestic disputes, the occasional meth lab in some guy's backyard, and breaking up high school parties. But Montrose is so quiet. Most days I just drive around making sure everyone's lawn looks good enough to avoid a fine. That was until 1997. I still remember the date because I'd just come back from the courthouse, October 17th. The air had that crisp fall feel, leaves turning amber and gold across the mountains. The kind of perfect autumn day that makes you forget the world can be an ugly place. I had my boots up on the desk, the radio playing some old Conway Twitty when the call came in. It was Donna Mitchell, owner of a little diner by the lake, the Blue Water Cafe, a place where locals gathered for gossip served alongside eggs and bacon. Donna wasn't prone to panic. In the 5 years I'd known her, she'd handled drunk fishermen, rowdy teenagers, and even a small kitchen fire without breaking a sweat. But today, her voice trembled. "Sheriff? We've got a situation. A woman just came in. She's hysterical. Says her fiancé went hiking yesterday and never came back." I sighed, reaching for my thermos. "Tell her to calm down. Probably just got himself lost. Happens every season." "I don't think so." Donna's voice dropped to a whisper. "She was out searching this morning and found his water bottle. Says there was blood on it." That made me sit up straight. "Blood? She's sure?" Red enough to make her scream when she saw it. "And Sheriff? There's something else. Those noises are back." My hand paused on the thermos cap. The noises had been a point of contention in town council meetings for years. Some blamed mining operations in the next county over. Others said it was just the wind playing tricks through the mountain passes. But Donna, she'd been adamant it was something else. "Donna, it's Kentucky. We got raccoons, foxes, maybe a bobcat if we're lucky." "I know what animals sound like," she snapped, her voice suddenly hard with conviction. "This is different. It's wrong." I could picture her standing there, phone cord wrapped around her finger, glancing nervously out at the pines that pressed close to the back of her diner. The forest around Montrose was old, the kind of old that seemed to watch you back. "I'll check it out," I said, already reaching for my keys. "Keep the woman there." The missing hiker's name was William Foster, Donna told me. Everyone called him Will. He was from Louisville, in town for a weekend getaway with his fiancée, Rebecca. They were staying at one of the lakeside cabins, planning their wedding for the spring. Just another city couple looking for a quaint mountain backdrop for their photos. The drive to the Blue Water Cafe took me past all the familiar landmarks of Montrose. The hardware store where Old Man Winters had been selling the same inventory since the 70s. The post office with its cracked steps and faded flag. The elementary school where my nephew went. Playground empty on a Saturday. It was all so normal. So goddamn normal. Rebecca Peters was sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. Her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that looked like it had been neat yesterday. Now wisps escaped around her face, which was pale with fear. "Miss Peters?" I slid into the seat across from her. "I'm the sheriff. Donna says your fiancé is missing?" She nodded, pushing a cell phone across the table. "We have reception at the cabin, but his phone's been off since yesterday afternoon. He said he was just going for a quick hike before dinner. 2 hours tops." "And when did you start to worry?" "When it got dark." She swallowed hard. "Will's punctual. Always has been. He wouldn't just not come back. And this morning, I went looking and found this." She placed a blue water bottle on the table. There were indeed dark stains on it, rusty brown now that they'd dried. Blood, most likely. "Where exactly did you find this?" "About half a mile up the old ridge trail. It was just lying there, Off the path a bit. Her voice cracked. There were marks in the dirt, like something had been dragged. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral while something cold settled in my stomach. The old ridge trail had a reputation. Nothing official, nothing you'd find in reports, but locals knew to be off that trail before sundown. I'll head up there now, I told her, pocketing the water bottle in an evidence bag. Was he carrying anything else? Backpack? Camera? A small backpack. Green. Had our first aid kit, some granola bars, his pocket knife, and his camera. He's a photographer. That's why we came here. The fall colors. Her voice caught. Please find him. I promised I would, though something in me already doubted the outcome would be what she hoped for. As I headed back to my cruiser, Donna caught me by the arm. You watch yourself up there, she said, her eyes serious. Whatever made those noises, I heard them again last night. Went on for hours. What do they sound like? I asked, curious despite myself. She thought for a moment. Like something big moving through the trees, but not natural, not like an animal, more deliberate. She shivered. And sometimes, it sounds almost like words. I nodded, not wanting to dismiss her, but not ready to believe in monsters either. I'll keep my radio on. Call if Rebecca remembers anything else. The drive to the trailhead took 15 minutes, winding up through pine forests that grew thicker and darker the higher I went. I parked by the weathered sign that said, Old Ridge Trail, 2 miles to summit. There were no other cars in the small gravel lot, just mine, and the endless wall of trees. I grabbed my flashlight even though it was barely noon. The trail ahead disappeared into shadow quickly, the forest canopy so thick that sunlight only reached the ground in scattered patches. I checked my gun too, making sure it was loaded. Standard procedure, I told myself, ignoring the prickle of unease at the back of my neck. The trail started off innocently enough. Packed dirt, occasional stone steps where the path steepened, the usual markers nailed to trees. But as I walked, I noticed the silence creeping in. The woods around Montrose were usually alive with sound, birds calling, squirrels chattering, the constant background rustle of small creatures going about their business. But here, nothing. Just the crunch of my boots and my own breathing, growing more deliberate as I pushed deeper into the woods. About 20 minutes up the trail, I reached the spot Rebecca must have described. The path widened slightly, opening into a small rest area with a fallen log serving as a bench. Scattered around were signs of a brief stop, a granola bar wrapper caught in the underbrush, an impression in the pine needles where someone might have sat, and there, just as she'd said, signs of disturbance off the main trail. I crouched down, examining the forest floor. The pine needles and leaves were scraped away in a long, continuous path, leading deeper into the trees. In places, dark stains splattered the foliage. More blood. I straightened up, unholstering my gun. 12 years of law enforcement, and I'd drawn my weapon maybe a dozen times, usually just as a precaution. But something about this scene made the hair on my arm stand up. This wasn't a lost hiker or a twisted ankle. This was something else. I followed the drag marks, pushing through underbrush that grew thicker as I moved away from the trail. The blood splatter increased, no longer just drops but smears, as if something bleeding heavily had been pulled through the forest. I used my radio to call in my position and the situation, but got only static in return. The mountains around Montrose were notorious for dead zones. The silence pressed in around me, unnaturally complete. No wind through the trees, no insects buzzing, nothing. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting. That's when I noticed the smell. At first, just the usual forest scents. Pine sap, damp earth, decaying leaves. But underneath, something sickly sweet and metallic. The unmistakable smell of fresh blood and opened flesh. The drag marks led me to a small clearing, where the trees parted just enough to let weak sunlight filter down. And there, in that hollow space between ancient trees, I found what was left of Will Foster. He was lying face down, his limbs twisted at angles that human joints weren't meant to bend. His green backpack was still strapped to his back, but it had been torn open, the contents scattered, a first aid kit ripped apart, energy bar wrappers, a shattered camera lens reflecting pinpoints of light. But it wasn't the disarray that made me stop cold. It was the wounds. 4 deep parallel gashes ran down his back, from his shoulder blades to his hips, slicing through his hiking jacket, the shirt beneath, and deep into the flesh. The cuts were clean, precise, not the ragged tears of an animal attack, but something almost surgical. The edges of the wounds weren't jagged but smooth, as if whatever had made them had blades rather than claws. I'd seen bear attacks before. I'd seen what mountain lions could do. This was neither. Bears maul, they tear, they crush. Mountain lions go for the throat, the back of the neck. This was methodical, deliberate. I crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene more than necessary. Will's head was turned to the side, one eye open, staring blindly at the forest floor. In death, his face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, not just pain, but the kind of fear that comes from seeing something your mind refuses to process. As I examined the body, I noticed something else strange. Despite the severity of the wounds, there was less blood than there should have been. Yes, the forest floor was stained dark beneath him, but not enough for wounds this catastrophic. It was as if he'd been killed elsewhere and brought here, or as if something had... I stopped that thought before it could fully form. But a chill ran down my spine anyway. I reached for my radio again, ready to call this in as a homicide, when I heard it. A low rumbling noise from somewhere behind me. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something in between. It reminded me of the sound a mountain makes before an avalanche. A deep, subsonic vibration you feel more than hear. Slowly, I turned, my hand tightening on my gun. At first I saw nothing, just trees and shadows. But then a shadow moved, detached itself from the others, took shape. At the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the trunk of a massive pine, stood something. My first confused thought was that it was a man in some kind of costume. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized no human could move like that, could be shaped like that. It was hunched forward, its back curved in a way that should have been anatomically impossible. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too jointed, like a spider's legs stretched and covered with leathery skin. It had a head, broad and flat like a hammer, but where its face should have been, there was only a suggestion of features, indentations rather than eyes, a slash rather than a mouth. We stared at each other across the clearing. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was watching me, studying me. There was intelligence in its stillness, a predatory patience that made my finger tremble on the trigger of my gun. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and sprint back down the trail. But I knew, somehow I knew, that it would be on me before I'd gone 10 steps. The thing shifted its weight, wood cracking beneath what passed for its feet. It moved with a fluid grace that nothing so twisted should have possessed. And then it made that sound again, that rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in my chest like bass notes too deep to properly hear. My mouth was dry. "What do you want?" I called out, immediately regretting making any noise at all. The thing's head tilted, like a dog trying to understand human speech. Then it moved forward, one deliberate step at a time, emerging fully from the tree line. In the weak sunlight I could see it better, though part of me wished I couldn't. Its skin wasn't just leathery but almost bark-like, with ridges and furrows like an ancient tree. It stood at least 7 feet tall when upright, though it preferred to hunch, bringing its head down to the level of my chest. Its arms, if you could call them that, hung nearly to the ground, ending in hands with too many joints, too many fingers, each tipped with what looked more like bone than claw. I raised my gun, aiming at what I hoped was a vital area, though I had no idea if this thing even had organs arranged like a normal creature. "Stay back," I warned, my voice steadier than I felt. It paused, that strange head tilting the other way. Then, without warning, it charged. I fired 3 times. The shots cracked through the silence of the forest like thunder. I might have hit it. There was a spray of something dark where one bullet connected, but it didn't slow. It crossed the clearing in 3 bounding strides, moving with a speed that nothing that size should have possessed. I dove to the side, rolling through pine needles and leaves as it rushed past me. The thing skidded, tearing up earth as it turned, those long limbs splaying out for balance. It reared up to its full height, and I swear I heard bones popping and joints cracking as it reconfigured itself for another charge. I scrambled backward, my back hitting a tree trunk. Nowhere left to go. The creature advanced more slowly now, almost savoring the moment. I raised my gun again, knowing it was useless but unwilling to die without a fight. And then came the blast of a shotgun, so close and so loud it left my ears ringing. The creature jerked, a chunk of its shoulder disappearing in a spray of dark matter. It made a sound then, not a scream, not a roar, but a deep, guttural grunt that seemed to come from some ancient place. Then it bolted, moving in a blur of limbs and shadow, disappearing into the trees faster than my eyes could track it. I spun around, looking for my savior, gun still raised. "You can put that down, son. It's gone for now." An old man stood at the edge of the clearing, a shotgun cradled in his arms like an old friend. He was tall and rail-thin, with a face weathered by decades in the sun. A gray beard reached halfway down his chest, and beneath a battered cap, sharp blue eyes regarded me with a mixture of concern and what looked like resignation. "Roy," I gasped, recognizing the old groundskeeper who maintained the cabins around the lake. "What the hell was that thing?" Roy Simmons, spat tobacco juice onto the forest floor, then slowly lowered his shotgun. "Been here longer than any of us," he said, his voice gravelly from years of smoke and whiskey. "Longer than the town, probably." "That doesn't answer my question," I said, finally lowering my own weapon, though my hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "Not sure anyone has a proper answer," Roy replied, moving forward to stand beside Will's body. He looked down at the corpse with an expression that spoke of unwelcome familiarity. "Not sure what to call it, but it ain't just an animal, it's smarter. Hunts like a predator, but doesn't eat like one." I blinked, trying to process this. "Doesn't eat? Then why?" "It kills," Roy said simply, still looking at the mangled body. "It kills and leaves the bodies, just like this one." He nudged the corpse with the toe of his boot. "Always the same marks, always the same look in their eyes." "How long have you known about this thing?" I asked Roy, my mind still struggling to process what I'd just seen. Roy sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. "Known about it since I was a boy. My grandfather used to warn us. Stay off the mountain after dark. Don't go wandering alone." He gazed off into the trees where the creature had disappeared. Back then it was just stories, things to scare kids straight. But then in '73 a family went camping up near Blackwater Falls, parents and 2 kids. He shook his head. "Found him just like this one. State police said it was a bear. Case closed." My radio crackled to life, making us both jump. "Dispatch asking for an update." I keyed the mic, hesitated, then reported finding the missing hiker, apparent animal attack, requesting state police and the county coroner. I didn't mention Roy, didn't mention what I'd seen. I wasn't ready to put that in an official report. "Why haven't you told anyone?" I asked Roy when I'd signed off. "People are dying." "Told plenty," he shrugged. "Sheriff before you. Mayor, Forest Service. Nobody believes in old drunk spinning monster stories." He spat again. "Besides, it don't come out much, maybe once every few years. Takes someone, then goes back to wherever it hides." "And what? We just accept that? Let tourists wander up here to get slaughtered?" Roy's eyes hardened. "What would you have me do? Hunt it? I've tried. So did my father before me. That thing." He gestured with his shotgun toward the forest. "It knows these woods better than any man alive, and it's smarter than it looks. Watches, waits, learns." I looked down at Will Foster's body, at the precision of those awful cuts. "What is it? Some kind of mutated animal?" Roy laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Ain't no animal. Animals kill for food, for territory. This thing, it kills because it wants to, because it can." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling around us like the unnatural quiet of the forest. "We need to get the body back to town," I finally said, "and I need to tell his fiancée." Roy nodded. "I'll help you carry him. Ain't right to drag him back like the thing did." It took us nearly an hour to get Will's body back to the trailhead. We fashioned a crude stretcher from fallen branches and Roy's hunting jacket, working in near silence. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, jumping at every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. But the forest remained quiet, as if the thing had never been there at all. As we loaded the body into the back of my cruiser, Roy put a hand on my arm. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "This ain't going in no official report, is it?" I hesitated. "I have to report something, Roy. A man is dead. Sure, animal attack. Mountain lion maybe, but not that thing. Town don't need that kind of attention, and who'd believe you anyway?" His blue eyes held mine. "You saw what happened when it got shot, barely slowed it down. You start telling people about monsters in the woods, they'll either think you're crazy or they'll come looking with hunting rifles and get themselves killed." He had a point. What would I even say? That I saw some kind of impossible creature that shouldn't exist? That an old mountain man saved me with a well-timed shotgun blast? I'd be laughed out of law enforcement, best case scenario. Worst case, I'd trigger a panic or a monster hunting frenzy that would only lead to more deaths. "I'll keep it simple," I agreed reluctantly. "But Roy, we can't just ignore this. What if it comes back? What if it comes closer to town next time?" Roy's face grew solemn. "It won't. Not for a while anyway. It's got patterns. Takes someone, then disappears for months, sometimes years. Like it needs to. I don't know, digest or something. Though it don't eat what it kills." How many people has it taken that you know of?" He thought for a moment. "Since I've been alive? Maybe a dozen. Not all reported. Hunters, hikers, couple of locals who should have known better." He looked away. "My brother, back in '84, went hunting alone, against my warnings. Found pieces of him scattered across half a mile of ridgeline. I didn't know what to say to that. I'm sorry. seemed woefully inadequate. "Just watch yourself," Roy said, stepping back from the cruiser. "And maybe put up some signs. Close that trail for a while. Say there's been bear sightings." I nodded, climbing into the driver's seat. "Where can I find you? If I have more questions." "Cabin 8, down by the lake, the old caretaker's place." He tapped the roof of my car. "Be careful what you put in that report, Sheriff. Some things, once they're written down, take on a life of their own." I drove back to town with Will Foster's body in my back seat, the air conditioning cranked to full blast despite the autumn chill. The smell of blood and something else, something wrong, filled the car. I rolled down the windows, but it didn't help. Rebecca was still at the diner when I pulled up, Donna sitting beside her, both women jumping to their feet as I entered. One look at my face told them everything they needed to know. "No," Rebecca whispered, collapsing back into the booth. "No, no, no." I sat across from her, removing my hat. "I'm so sorry, Miss Peters. We found Will up on the trail. There's been some kind of animal attack." "Animal?" Donna's eyes narrowed slightly. "Looks that way," I said, not meeting her gaze. "I've called the state police and the coroner. They'll need to examine him, do an autopsy." Rebecca was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. "He was just going for a walk. Just a short walk before dinner." I reached across the table, touching her hand gently. "Did Will mention seeing anything unusual yesterday? Any animals? Did he say anything about noises in the woods?" She shook her head, wiping at her tears. "No, nothing. He was excited about the view from the ridge, said the light would be perfect for photos at sunset." Her voice broke. "I should have gone with him." "No," I said firmly. "You shouldn't have. Whatever happened to Will, it happened fast. There's nothing you could have done, except become another victim." I thought but didn't say. I stayed with her until the state police arrived, 2 troopers who took my statement with professional detachment. I kept it simple, just as I'd promised Roy. Missing hiker, signs of an animal attack, body recovered. I mentioned nothing about the strange precision of the wounds, nothing about the creature I'd seen, nothing about Roy Simmons and his shotgun. The lead investigator, a sergeant named Harmon, pulled me aside as they were loading Will's body into their vehicle. "What kind of animal are we talking about here, Sheriff? Bear? Cougar?" I hesitated. "Not sure. The wounds were unusual." Harmon raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" 4 parallel cuts. Deep. Clean. I demonstrated with my fingers. "Like this." He frowned. "Mountain lion could do that. They've got 4 main claws. Though it's odd one would attack an adult male unprovoked." "That's what I thought," I said, relieved he'd supplied a rational explanation. "We'll know more after the autopsy," Harmon continued. "You closing the trail?" "Already called the Forest Service. They're putting up notices tomorrow. Bear danger." Harmon nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good call. Last thing we need is more tourists getting themselves killed out here." As the state police drove away with Will's body, I found myself standing alone in the diner parking lot, the sun beginning to set behind the mountains. The forest loomed dark and impenetrable beyond the town limits, shadows deepening among the trees. I wondered if it was watching, if it could see me from up there, if it was already selecting its next victim. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Rebecca Peters returned to Louisville with the grim task of planning a funeral instead of a wedding. The state police finished their investigation, ruling Will Foster's death an animal attack, most likely a mountain lion, though they admitted the wounds were atypical. The case was closed, filed away, another tragic accident in the wilderness, but I couldn't let it go. At night, I dreamed of that thing in the forest. Its impossible limbs, its eyeless face, the way it moved, too fast, too fluid for something so large. In my dreams, Roy's shotgun never fired, and I felt those bone claws slice through my back just as they had through Will's. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, reaching for my gun on the nightstand. During the day, I found myself driving up to the trailhead repeatedly, parking at the newly installed, trail closed, dangerous wildlife sign, and just sitting there, staring into the trees. I never went back up the path. Something told me the creature wouldn't appear again so soon, but I watched, and I listened. The forest remained silent. A week after finding Will's body, I finally worked up the courage to visit Roy Simmons. His cabin sat at the far end of the lakeside resort, separated from the tourist accommodations by a stand of pines. It was an old place, logs darkened by age and weather, a stone chimney sending a thin plume of smoke into the clear autumn sky. Roy was sitting on the porch when I pulled up, as if he'd been expecting me. A shotgun, perhaps the same one that had saved my life, leaned against the wall beside his rocking chair. "Figured you'd be by eventually," he said as I approached, not bothering to stand. Got coffee on if you want some. I sat in the empty chair beside him, looking out over the still waters of the lake. I need to know more, Roy. About that thing, Roy sighed, reaching for a tin of tobacco on the small table between us. Not much more to tell that I haven't already. It's been here a long time. Kills when it wants to. Can't be caught. Can't be killed, far as I know. Have you ever tried? Besides shooting at it, I mean. He snorted. Of course I have. Set traps all over these mountains when I was younger. After what happened to my brother. He spat over the porch railing. Never caught nothing but the occasional coyote. It's too smart for simple snares. And I had crazy ideas once. Electricity, poison, even tried to burn out a cave system I thought it might be using. He shook his head. Nothing worked, and eventually, I got too old to keep trying. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. What about the state authorities? Fish and wildlife? Hasn't anyone ever investigated? Like I said, I tried telling folks. Back in the 80s, after my brother, I went to the Forest Service. They sent 2 rangers up to look around. Never found a thing, of course. He paused, tamping tobacco into his pipe. One of them came back a month later on his own. Scientist type, real interested in what I'd described. Spent a week up in those woods with all kinds of equipment. Recording devices, cameras, the works. And Roy struck a match, the flare momentarily illuminating the deep lines of his face. They found him in pieces across Blackwater Ridge. Official report said he fell. Animals got to the body. But I saw him before they cleaned it up. Same marks, same cuts. We sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore and the rhythmic creak of Roy's rocking chair. The townspeople, I finally said. Do they know? Is that why no locals use that trail? Roy puffed on his pipe before answering. Some know. The older folks. They've heard the stories, seen the pattern over the years. They keep their kids close, especially when there's been a killing. But most don't believe. Not really. They just think the mountains can be dangerous, which ain't wrong. He glanced at me. They'll forget in time. Start using the trail again, until the next one. And we just accept that? People dying every few years? What would you have us do? Evacuate the town, burn down the forest? That thing's been here longer than us, Sheriff. It'll be here long after we're gone. His eyes, reflecting the setting sun, looked almost yellow. Nature's got teeth and claws we've forgotten about. Sitting in our houses with our guns and our lights, we think we've conquered the wild. But there's things out there that remind us we haven't. I couldn't accept that. Couldn't accept that we were powerless against this thing, whatever it was. There has to be a way to stop it. Everything can be killed. Roy studied me for a long moment. Maybe, but not by you, not by me, and not by any hunting party you might think to organize. He tapped his pipe against the porch rail. My grandfather used to say it was a spirit, a forest demon from the old country, brought over when settlers came. My father thought it might be something left over from prehistoric times, hiding in the deep caves under the mountains. Me? He shrugged. I don't much care what it is anymore. I just know it's here, and it kills, and it can't be stopped. I left Roy's cabin as darkness fell, more frustrated than when I'd arrived. His resignation, his acceptance of the creature as some immutable fact of life, bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The drive back into town took me past the Blue Water Cafe, its windows glowing warmly in the growing darkness. On impulse, I pulled in, suddenly craving coffee and human connection to chase away the chill Roy's words had left. Donna was behind the counter, wiping down surfaces in preparation for closing. She looked up as the bell over the door announced my arrival, her expression unreadable. Sheriff, she said, her tone neutral. Coffee? Or something stronger? You look like you could use it. I sat at the counter, removing my hat. Coffee's fine, thanks. She poured me a cup, then leaned on the counter opposite me, arms folded. You've been up to Roy's place. It wasn't a question. In a town the size of Montrose, everyone knew everyone's business. I nodded. He tell you about the thing in the woods? She asked, her voice low despite us being the only ones in the diner. I looked up sharply. You know about it? Donna's face was grim. My grandmother used to call it the woodwalker. Said it walked on 2 legs sometimes, 4 others, always watching from the trees. She shivered slightly. I saw it once, when I was a girl, just for a second, at the edge of our property. Thought it was a man at first, standing too still. Then it wasn't. Why didn't you say anything? When I came to investigate Will's disappearance, she gave me a look that suggested I was being naive. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was a hysterical woman seeing things that weren't there? She had a point. Before seeing it myself, I would have dismissed any talk of monsters as superstition or imagination. The noises you mentioned, I said. That's the thing? Donna nodded. It makes that sound before it hunts, like a warning or a challenge. She poured herself a cup of coffee, adding a generous splash from a bottle kept under the counter. After all these years, I still can't decide if it's intelligent. Really intelligent, I mean, or just instinctual. Whether it kills because it's natural to it, like a wolf hunting deer, or because it enjoys it. Roy thinks it's been here longer than the town. Longer than people, maybe, Donna agreed. My grandmother's people, Cherokee, they had stories, said it was old when the first tribes came to these mountains. She sipped her coffee, said it was a lesson about respecting the wild places, that some parts of the forest weren't meant for humans. I rubbed my face, suddenly exhausted. So what do we do? Just accept that occasionally it takes someone, just close trails and put up warning signs and hope for the best? Donna's expression softened. It's what we've always done. What choice do we have? We could warn people, really warn them. Not just about bears or mountain lions, but about what's really up there. She laughed, though there was no humor in it. And say what? Welcome to Montrose, home of a prehistoric monster that occasionally dismembers hikers. Tourism is half our economy, Sheriff. The lake, the mountains, the unspoiled wilderness. That's what keeps this town alive, even if it costs lives. Her eyes hardened. Life costs lives, Sheriff. Every town has its price. Coastal towns have hurricanes. Farm communities have tornadoes. Mining towns have cave-ins. We have that thing. Once every few years, it takes someone, usually an outsider who doesn't know better than to stay on marked trails and be back before dark. I stared into my coffee, finding no answers in its black depths. And the locals? Do they all know to stay away? The smart ones do, she said quietly. The ones who listen to the old stories, who pay attention when the forest goes quiet. She refilled my cup without asking. You've seen it now. You're one of us, one of the ones who knows. So you'll stay off that mountain when the noises start. You'll warn who you can without starting a panic. And you'll learn to live with it, just like the rest of us have. I left the diner feeling no better than when I'd entered. The town was quiet as I drove through. Most businesses closed for the night. A few locals walking dogs or sitting on porches enjoying the mild evening. Normal, peaceful, as if there wasn't something monstrous living in the hills above them. But now I noticed things I hadn't before. The way people glanced up at the mountains as the sun set. The subtle hurrying of steps as darkness fell. The porch lights left burning all night, not just for convenience but as sentinels against the dark. Montrose knew. Maybe not every resident, maybe not consciously, but the town itself. It remembered. It adapted. It survived. The question was, could I? The state police finished their investigation by the end of October. Will Foster's death was officially ruled an animal attack, likely a mountain lion, though the autopsy report noted some anomalies in the wound pattern. The case was closed. The paperwork filed. Life in Montrose returned to its quiet routine, on the surface anyway. I found myself changed by what I'd seen. I carried my service weapon even off duty now. I installed extra lights around my small house at the edge of town. I kept my blinds closed at night, unable to shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness beyond. Winter came early that year, snow falling in thick blankets across the mountains by mid-November. The tourists thinned out, the lakeside cabins emptied, and the town settled into its off-season quiet. I should have felt safer. The creature, whatever it was, hadn't been seen since the incident with Will. Roy assured me it typically went dormant during the coldest months, perhaps hibernating like a bear, but I couldn't relax. Couldn't forget. I spent my free time researching, digging through old newspaper archives, county records, anything that might give me more information about the thing in the woods. I found scattered reports going back decades. Mysterious disappearances, unusual animal attacks, bodies found with strange wounds. Never enough to establish a pattern unless you already knew what to look for. But once you did, it was unmistakable. The thing had been killing for generations. January brought a particularly brutal cold snap. Temperatures dropping below zero for a week straight. The lake froze solid. The forest paths disappeared under deep drifts, and the town huddled around fireplaces and space heaters, waiting for the worst to pass. I was at the station finishing reports on a minor fender bender, when my deputy Mark stuck his head in. Got a weird call, he said, frowning. Some kids ice fishing on the lake say they found something frozen in the ice, something big. I looked up sharply. Animal? Mark hesitated. Not sure. Kid who called was pretty freaked out. Said it didn't look like any animal he'd ever seen. My heart rate kicked up. Where on the lake? Far side, near the old boat launch. Want me to check it out? No, I said, perhaps too quickly. I'll handle it. You stay here, man the phones. 20 minutes later, I was standing on the frozen surface of Lake Montrose, the wind cutting through my heavy coat like a knife. 3 teenagers huddled nearby, stamping their feet to stay warm, their ice fishing gear abandoned. "Over there," the oldest boy said, pointing to a dark spot in the ice about 50 yards away. We were drilling holes, and Jimmy here noticed it under the ice. Thought it was a deer at first, but I nodded, already moving toward the spot, the ice creaking beneath my boots. "You boys stay back. Could be dangerous." As I approached, the shape beneath the ice became clearer. It was large, easily the size of a bear, but the proportions were all wrong. I knelt down, brushing away a thin layer of snow to get a better look, and there it was, the thing from the forest, perfectly preserved in the clear ice of the lake. It was curled in on itself, those long limbs wrapped around its body like a spider in death. Its leathery skin was a mottled gray-brown, textured like tree bark but with an almost metallic sheen. Its head was tucked down, but I could make out that broad, flat shape, those suggestions of features that weren't quite a face, and for the first time I could see what passed for its eyes. Not eyes at all, but dark, sunken hollows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I jerked back, nearly losing my balance on the slick surface. It was dead. It had to be. Frozen solid in the ice, maybe for decades. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, even now, that those lightless pits were tracking my movements. "What is it?" one of the boys called from a safe distance. "Nothing," I called back, standing up. "Just a weirdly shaped log. Ice playing tricks on you." The boys clearly didn't believe me, but they weren't eager to come closer either. I shooed them back to shore, telling them the ice wasn't safe here, that they should find another spot to fish. As soon as they were gone, I pulled out my phone and called Roy. He arrived 30 minutes later, moving slowly across the ice, his ancient pickup parked haphazardly at the boat launch. He didn't speak as he approached, just knelt beside me and stared down at the thing trapped beneath our feet. "Well, I'll be damned," he finally said, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Never thought I'd see it like this." "Is it dead?" I asked. Roy studied the frozen figure. "Hard to say. Could be. Could be just waiting." He tapped the ice with his knuckle. "Ice is what, 1.5 feet thick? That thing's gotta be 10-15 feet down. How did it get there?" "It was in the forest when we saw it. Miles from the lake." Roy shrugged. "Maybe there's more than one. Maybe it moves around in ways we don't understand. Or maybe," he trailed off, eyes narrowing, "maybe this is an old one. Been here for years, decades even." I looked at him sharply. "You think there could be more than one?" "Never seen two at once," he admitted. "But I've wondered. The pattern of killing sometimes doesn't make sense for just one creature. Sometimes they happen too close together, in places too far apart." He spat on the ice. "Or maybe it just moves faster than we think possible." We stood in silence for a long moment, the wind whistling across the frozen lake. "What do we do?" I finally asked. "We could try to cut it out, study it, or destroy it." Roy laughed harshly. "With what? Chainsaws? Dynamite? You really want to mess with that thing, even if it is dead?" He shook his head. "Besides, look at the ice around it." I hadn't noticed before, but now I saw what he meant. The ice directly surrounding the creature was different, darker, almost black in places, with spiderweb cracks radiating outward. "It's melting through," I whispered. "Even frozen. It's affecting the ice." Roy nodded grimly. "Best leave it be. Spring thaw will come soon enough. Either it'll sink to the bottom, or," he didn't need to finish, "or it would be free again." "We can't just let it go," I argued. "If it's trapped, this is our chance. We have to do something." Roy gave me a long look. "You really think anything we do would make a difference? That thing survived who knows how long in these mountains. You think a bullet or a bomb or whatever else you're imagining would stop it?" He turned away. "Leave it be, Sheriff. Some things you just have to accept." But I couldn't accept it. Not after seeing Will Foster's mangled body. Not after learning how many others had died the same way. After Roy left, I stood on the ice for nearly an hour, staring down at the frozen creature, trying to formulate a plan. I could bring explosives. The county had some for clearing rock slides. I could organize a team, cut through the ice, haul the thing out before it thawed. But what then? Where would I take it? Who would I call? And what if Roy was right? What if trying to move it just woke it up? In the end, I did nothing. I roped off the area, posted signs warning of thin ice, and kept the location to myself. I told myself I was being cautious, responsible. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of the thing beneath the ice, yes, but also afraid of what would happen if I brought it to light. If I forced my town to confront the monster it had been ignoring for generations. February passed. March arrived with warming temperatures and the first hints of spring. The ice on the lake began to thin. patches of open water appearing near the shore. I checked the spot daily, watching as the creature became more visible as the ice cleared, then less visible as the water darkened. By early April, the ice was gone completely, the lake's surface a sheet of cold, dark water that revealed nothing of what might lurk below. I kept waiting for reports, a sighting in the forest, another attack, something to indicate the thing was active again, but nothing came. The spring tourist season began, hikers and fishermen returning to Montrose, cabins filling up, the Blue Water Cafe bustling with activity. Life returned to normal. Or what passed for normal in a town with a secret like ours. April 15th marked my 12-year anniversary as Sheriff of Montrose. I'd planned to celebrate with a quiet dinner, maybe a drink at the town's only bar. Instead, I found myself sitting in my cruiser at the Old Ridge trailhead, staring up at the path where I'd found Will Foster's body. The trail closed signs had been removed the week before, the Forest Service deeming the danger past. Fresh footprints marked the dirt. New hikers already exploring the trail despite its history. They didn't know, couldn't know, and those who did know had chosen silence. As I sat there, Donna's words from months ago echoed in my mind. Every town has its price. Was this Montrose's? A sacrifice every few years to something ancient and unknowable? A pact of silence to protect the town's economy, its very existence? Could I be part of that? Could I stay here, knowing what I knew, waiting for the next victim? I put in my resignation the next day, told the mayor it was time for a change, that 12 years was enough for any sheriff. He accepted without much question, already talking about who might replace me. I sold my house, packed what little I wanted to keep, and left Montrose 2 weeks later, found an apartment in Cincinnati, then a job in security at an office building. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, just normal people with normal problems. No forests, no mountains, no creatures watching from the shadows. But even now, years later, I think about Montrose, about the thing in the woods. I check the local news online sometimes, scanning for reports of missing hikers or unusual animal attacks. There have been a few. When people ask why I chose this job, I usually tell them it's for the adventure, not because of a deep-seated desire to save lives or because I want to connect with nature. No. I picked search and rescue because it keeps things simple. I find people, I bring them home. That's the job. Sounds easy, right? It was until that day in late September 2008, out in the middle of Coconino National Forest, Arizona. I'm Pierce Gunnarsson, a no-nonsense, straight-talking guy. No kids, no wife. I'm a free agent, which helps, considering this job can pull you out of bed at 3 a.m. My life is simple, and that's the way I like it. Or at least, it used to be. The call came in on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes you forget winter exists. I was sitting in my truck outside the station, eating a sandwich and watching the clouds gather over the rim when the radio crackled to life. Missing persons report near the Mongolian Rim. 2 campers, last seen heading into the backcountry 3 days ago. 3 days. That was already pushing it. In my experience, people who've been missing that long are either dead or wish they were. But I kept that cheerful thought to myself as I radioed back my confirmation. The drive to the last known location took me deep into the forest, past the tourist areas and into the places where cell towers don't reach, and the trees grow so thick they block out the sky. The deeper I went, the more the landscape changed. What started as familiar hiking trails gave way to ancient game paths, and those eventually disappeared entirely into wilderness that looked like it hadn't been disturbed since the Ice Age. I'd been working these woods for 12 years, knew every major trail and most of the minor ones, but there were still places that felt wrong, areas where the trees grew too close together and the shadows fell at impossible angles, places where experienced hikers got turned around and seasoned hunters came back with stories they'd never repeat sober. The missing campers were a young couple from Phoenix. According to the report, they'd told friends they were planning a 3-day backpacking trip to get away from civilization. They'd picked the right place for it. The area they'd chosen was 20 miles from the nearest road, with terrain that could break an ankle or worse if you weren't careful. I parked my truck where the trail ended and shouldered my pack. The weight was familiar, comforting even. 60 pounds of gear that had pulled me through more rescues than I could count. First aid kit, emergency shelter, extra food and water, flares, rope, and my trusty GPS unit that had never let me down. The trail markers stopped after the first mile. From there, it was all instinct and experience. I followed the faint signs that most people would miss. A broken branch here, a disturbed patch of ground there. The couple had been smart enough to stick to the established path at first, but I could see where they'd started to deviate, probably thinking they'd found a shortcut or a more scenic route. Amateur mistake. The forest doesn't care about your schedule or your comfort level. It'll take you exactly as far as it wants to, and sometimes that's not far enough to find your way back. The temperature dropped as the sun sank lower, and I found myself checking my watch more frequently. I'd been walking for 2 hours with no sign of the missing campers except for the occasional footprint in the softer ground. The forest was eerily quiet, missing the usual sounds of wildlife that should have been preparing for evening feeding. No bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I'd experienced quiet forests before, but this felt different. This felt like the kind of silence that comes right before something terrible happens. The kind animals sense long before humans do, when they abandon an area and leave it to whatever's coming. I stopped to check my GPS coordinates against the map, trying to plot the most likely path the couple would have taken. That's when I noticed the scratch marks on the nearest tree, deep gouges in the bark, running from about waist height all the way up to where I couldn't reach. Too high for any animal I knew, too deliberate to be accidental damage. The gouges were fresh, no more than a few days old. Sap was still oozing from the wounds, and when I touched it, it came away sticky and warm on my fingers. Whatever had made these marks had been here recently. I pulled out my radio and tried to call back to base, but got nothing but static. The terrain played hell with radio signals, and the thick canopy didn't help. I'd known this might happen, but it still made me feel isolated in a way I didn't like. The smart thing would have been to turn back, wait for daylight, and return with backup. But somewhere out there, 2 people were counting on me to find them. If they were still alive, they wouldn't last another night in the dropping temperatures. I pressed on, following the trail deeper into the forest. The trees grew closer together here, their branches intertwining overhead to form a natural tunnel that blocked out most of the remaining daylight. I had to use my flashlight even though sunset was still an hour away. The beam cut through the darkness ahead of me, illuminating patches of ground that looked increasingly disturbed, not just from human passage, but from something else. Something larger that had passed through recently, leaving broken branches and torn earth in its wake. I'd been tracking for long enough to recognize the signs of different animals. Bears left distinctive claw marks and disturbed vegetation in predictable patterns. Mountain lions were more subtle, but their tracks were unmistakable. Even elk and deer had their own signatures in the way they moved through the forest. This was none of those things. This was something else entirely. The smell hit me first. Sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. It was faint at first, just a hint carried on the evening breeze, but it grew stronger as I moved deeper into the forest. I'd smelled death before, both human and animal, but this was different. This was wrong in a way that made my stomach turn. I followed the scent, my flashlight beam dancing across the increasingly disturbed ground. Broken branches hung at unnatural angles, and the undergrowth was flattened in wide swaths that spoke of something massive moving through with complete disregard for the obstacles in its path. The trees here were different too. Ancient pines and oaks that should have been magnificent were instead twisted and gnarled, their bark scarred with the same deep gouges I'd seen earlier. Some of the marks were old, healed over with layers of sap and new growth. Others were fresh, still weeping resin that caught the light like tears. I found the first piece of camping gear about 50 yards off what remained of the trail. A torn piece of nylon fabric, bright blue against the dark earth. I knelt and examined it, noting the ragged edges and the way it had been shredded rather than cut. No knife or sharp rock had done this. The tears were too random, too violent. 20 feet further, I found a hiking boot. Just one, lying on its side next to a fallen log. The leather was torn, and dark stains covered the interior. When I picked it up, something wet and viscous dripped from the opening. I didn't look too closely at what it might be. The smell was stronger now, almost overwhelming. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and mouth, but it didn't help much. The stench seemed to penetrate everything, coating the back of my throat with its sickly sweetness. I found the campsite in a small clearing where the couple had obviously spent at least one night. The tent was still standing, but barely. The nylon walls were shredded, hanging in strips that fluttered in the slight breeze. Camping gear was scattered everywhere, most of it broken or torn beyond recognition. The sleeping bags had been dragged from the tent and ripped open, their synthetic filling scattered across the ground like snow. A camp stove lay upside down, its fuel canister punctured and leaking. The sharp smell of white gas mixed with the underlying odor of decay. I approached the tent carefully, my flashlight beam probing the darkness inside. The floor was stained with something dark that reflected the light like oil. I didn't want to know what it was, but I had to check. Had to be sure. The tent was empty, but the interior told a story I didn't want to read. The walls were splattered with dark stains that could only be blood. Long scratches ran from floor to ceiling. as if something with claws had been trapped inside and fought desperately to get out, or maybe to get in. I backed away from the tent, my heart hammering against my ribs. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent and terrifying. The couple had been taken, that much was clear. But taken by what? I started to circle the campsite, looking for tracks or signs of where they might have gone. The ground here was softer, more receptive to prints, and I found them easily enough. Human footprints, running, stumbling, desperate. They led away from the camp in a rough line toward the deeper forest, but they weren't the only tracks. Mixed in with the human prints were others, larger, deeper, with long claw marks extending from what might have been toe prints. They were almost like a big cat's tracks, but wrong in every detail. Too large, too deep. The spacing between them suggested a stride that no natural animal could achieve. I followed the trail, my flashlight beam jumping from print to print. The human tracks became more erratic, showing signs of panic and exhaustion. One set veered off to the right, disappearing into a thicket of thorn bushes. The other continued straight ahead, but the steps were getting shorter, more stumbling. I chose to follow the trail that led straight ahead, hoping it would lead me to at least one of the missing campers. The forest grew denser as I walked, the trees pressing in from all sides until I was practically pushing through branches with every step. The smell was getting stronger again, and I realized I was walking toward its source. My flashlight beam caught something pale in the distance, and I forced myself to move closer. I found him in a small clearing, lying in a twisted heap that had once been a man. The body was positioned at the base of a massive pine tree, limbs bent at impossible angles. His face was turned toward me, eyes wide open and staring, mouth frozen in a silent scream of absolute terror. The scratches and tears covering his body were unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were too precise, too deliberate to be the result of a frenzied animal attack. It looked like something had been playing with him, testing different levels of damage, seeing how much he could take before he finally gave up. His clothes were shredded but not removed. Whatever had done this hadn't been interested in eating him. This had been about something else entirely. Something that enjoyed the act of killing more than the result. I forced myself to examine the body more closely, looking for clues about what had happened. The wounds were deep but not immediately fatal. He'd been alive for most of it, conscious enough to feel everything that was being done to him. The positioning of the injuries suggested he'd been held down, unable to escape or defend himself. I should have called for backup right then. Standard protocol demanded it, but my radio was still getting nothing but static, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the other camper might still be alive. Somewhere in this nightmare forest, a woman was counting on me to find her. I took pictures of the scene with my camera, documenting everything I could. The flash seemed impossibly bright in the darkness, and each burst of light revealed new details I wished I hadn't seen. The man's fingernails were torn and bloody, suggesting he'd fought back as best he could. The ground around him was churned up, showing signs of a struggle that had gone on for longer than I wanted to think about. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something else. The trees surrounding the clearing were marked with the same deep scratches I'd been seeing, but here they formed a pattern, not random damage, but deliberate markings, like territorial markers, or perhaps something else entirely, something that suggested intelligence behind the violence. I left the body where it was and continued following the second set of tracks. The woman's trail was easier to follow now, marked with torn pieces of clothing and drops of blood that looked black in the flashlight beam. She'd been running, but not randomly. Her path showed purpose, as if she knew where she was going. The forest felt different now. The oppressive silence had been replaced by something worse, the sense of being watched. I could feel eyes on me, tracking my movement through the trees. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made me jump. I'd been doing search and rescue for 12 years, and I'd never felt anything like this. The forest had become actively hostile, a living thing that wanted me gone. The very air felt thick and wrong, as if it was fighting my attempts to breathe. But I kept walking, following the trail deeper into the darkness. Somewhere ahead, a woman was waiting for rescue, and something else was waiting too. I found her 40 minutes later, crouched at the base of a massive pine tree like a broken doll. She was rocking back and forth, her arms wrapped around her knees, muttering something under her breath in a voice so low I couldn't make out the words. She didn't look up when I approached, even when I spoke her name. Her clothes were torn and bloody, but she didn't seem to be seriously injured, at least not physically. The damage to her mind was another story entirely. "Ma'am, can you hear me? My name is Pierce. I'm with Search and Rescue." She stopped rocking for a moment, her head tilting slightly as if she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. They were wide and unfocused, the pupils dilated despite the bright beam of my flashlight. "Fast," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's so fast." I knelt down beside her, trying to make myself less threatening. "You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here." She shook her head violently, her hair whipping around her face. "No, no, no. It's still out there. It's waiting. It knows we're here." "What's waiting? What did you see?" But she just kept repeating the same word over and over again. "Fast, fast, fast." Each repetition was a little louder, a little more desperate, until she was almost shouting it. I tried to calm her down, to get her to focus on me instead of whatever horror was playing out in her mind. But her eyes kept darting to the trees around us, following movements I couldn't see. Whatever she was looking at, it wasn't there for me. At least, not yet. I pulled out my radio and tried again to reach base, but the static was worse now. The interference was so bad it almost sounded like voices, whispers in a language I didn't recognize. I adjusted the frequency, trying to find a clear channel, but every setting brought only more static. "We need to move," I told her. "Can you walk?" She nodded, but when I helped her to her feet, she immediately collapsed again. Her legs were shaking too badly to support her weight, and her skin was cold and clammy. She was in shock, probably had been since whatever happened to her companion. I was trying to figure out how to carry her when she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her fingers dug into my flesh like claws, and her eyes focused on mine with sudden, terrifying clarity. "It's coming," she whispered. "It knows you're here now. It can smell you." That's when I heard it. A sound like branches breaking, but too rhythmic to be natural. Too deliberate. Something large was moving through the forest, and it was coming our way. The woman started shaking harder, her teeth chattering so loudly I could hear them clicking together. "Fast," she said again, but this time it wasn't a random repetition. This time it was a warning. I grabbed my knife from my belt. It was a good blade, sharp and strong, but looking at it now made me feel like a child with a toy sword. Whatever was coming for us, I had the feeling steel wouldn't be enough to stop it. The sound was getting closer. I could hear individual footsteps now, if you could call them that. They were too heavy, too widely spaced. Each impact sent vibrations through the ground that I could feel through my boots. "Stay behind me," I told the woman, though I wasn't sure what protection I could offer. The footsteps stopped. The forest fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of a predator that had found its prey and was deciding when to strike. I swept my flashlight beam across the trees, looking for any sign of movement. The light seemed weaker now, barely penetrating the darkness beyond the first ring of trees, but I could see shapes moving just beyond the edge of the beam, shadows that didn't match the stationary trunks and branches. "Where are you?" I called out, hoping my voice sounded braver than I felt. The answer came as a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not quite a growl, not quite a roar, but something that combined the worst elements of both. It was a sound that bypassed my ears and went straight to the primitive part of my brain, the part that remembered when humans were prey animals hiding in caves. Then I saw it. At first it looked like a mountain lion, but wrong in every detail. It was bigger than any cat I'd ever seen, easily the size of a small bear. Its fur was matted and dirty, hanging in clumps that couldn't quite hide the unnatural length of its limbs. The proportions were all wrong, as if someone had taken a normal animal and stretched it on a rack. But the most disturbing thing was the way it moved. It didn't walk like a quadruped. Instead, it seemed to flow from one position to another, its body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. One moment it was crouched on 4 legs, the next it was standing upright on 2, its front paws, or were they hands, reaching toward us with fingers that ended in claws like curved daggers. Its eyes reflected my flashlight beam, but they didn't glow with the simple shine of animal eyes. There was intelligence there, cunning and malevolent. It was studying us, calculating, planning. This wasn't a simple predator driven by hunger or territory. This was something that enjoyed the hunt for its own sake. The woman behind me started screaming, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. The creature's head tilted at the sound, and I swear I saw it smile. Not the baring of teeth that animals do, but an actual smile, lips pulling back to reveal rows of teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. I raised my knife, though I knew it was useless. The creature was at least 20 feet away, but I had the feeling it could cover that distance in a heartbeat. The woman had been right. It was fast, faster than anything natural had a right to be. "Stay back," I shouted, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to the creature or trying to convince myself I had some control over the situation. The creature took a step forward, and I saw how wrong I'd been about its size. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall when standing upright. Its muscle definition was visible even through the matted fur, and every movement spoke of power barely held in check. It was toying with us. It could have killed us already, but it was drawing out the moment, savoring our fear. The woman had stopped screaming, but I could hear her hyperventilating behind me. Her companion had probably made similar sounds before the end. The creature took another step and I knew our time was up. I tensed my muscles, preparing to charge. It was suicide, but maybe I could distract it long enough for the woman to run. Maybe she could make it back to the trail, back to civilization, back to people who would believe her story. But as I prepared to attack, the creature did something I hadn't expected. It stopped, its head turning to the side as if listening to something. Then it looked back at us, and I saw something new in its eyes. Not hunger or malice, but something that might have been disappointment. It had been called away. Something else wanted its attention more than we did. The creature gave us one last look, and then it was gone. Not running, not stalking away, but simply gone. One moment it was there. The next it had vanished into the shadows, as if it had never existed. I stood there for a long moment, knife still raised, unable to believe we were still alive. The woman had gone quiet behind me, and when I turned to check on her, I saw she had fainted. Her body was slumped against the tree, but she was breathing. I knew we couldn't stay here. Whatever had called the creature away might not hold its attention for long. We needed to find shelter, somewhere we could wait for daylight and help. That's when I saw it, barely visible through the trees. A structure, man-made and abandoned. A ranger tower, probably left over from the days when the Forest Service had money for such things. It was our only chance. The ranger tower was a relic from another era, built in the days when fire lookouts were staffed by humans instead of satellites and sensors. It stood 30 feet tall, a simple wooden structure perched on stilts that had somehow survived decades of weather and neglect. I half-carried, half-dragged the woman across the uneven ground, expecting at any moment to hear the sound of pursuit. But the forest remained silent, which was almost worse than the creature's presence. At least when I could see it, I knew where the danger was. The tower's ladder was still intact, though several rungs were missing or rotted through. I went up first, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The structure swayed slightly in the wind, but it felt solid enough. The lookout cabin at the top was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with windows on all sides and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. The floor was covered with debris, leaves, bird droppings, and the remains of what might have been a squirrel's nest, but the roof was intact, and the walls were solid. I climbed back down to get the woman. She was conscious again, but barely. Her eyes were unfocused, and she moved like a sleepwalker. I had to guide her hands to each rung of the ladder, practically pushing her up ahead of me. Once we were both inside, I secured the door as best I could. The original lock was long gone, but I found a piece of wood that I could wedge under the handle. It wouldn't stop a determined human, let alone whatever was hunting us, but it might buy us a few seconds. The woman collapsed in the corner, curling up in a ball with her back against the wall. She'd started muttering again, the same word over and over. Fast, fast, fast. It was like a mantra, or maybe a prayer. I checked my radio again, but the static was worse than ever. The interference was so bad it actually hurt to listen to, like feedback from a broken amplifier. I turned it off and tried to think of other options. My cell phone showed no bars, which wasn't surprising. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains and thick forest. Even if I could get a signal, who would I call? The local sheriff? The Forest Service? What would I tell them? That a monster was hunting us? I inventored my gear, looking for anything that might help. Rope, first aid kit, emergency food and water, flares. The flares might be useful if I could get them lit and thrown far enough to distract the creature, but that would require going back outside, and I wasn't ready to risk that yet. The woman had gone quiet again, but she was still conscious. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. I tried to talk to her, to get her to focus on something other than whatever trauma was playing out in her mind. "What's your name?" I asked. She didn't answer at first, but then she whispered something so quietly I had to lean closer to hear it. "Camellia," she said. "My name is Camellia. Camellia, I'm Pierce. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to help me. Can you tell me what happened?" She shook her head, not meeting my eyes. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." She was quiet for a long moment, and I thought she'd retreated back into her shock. But then she started talking, her voice flat and emotionless, like she was reading from a script. "We were sleeping. It was our second night. Something woke me up, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, but deeper. I thought it was just an animal, maybe a bear getting into our food." She paused, her hands shaking as she pulled her knees closer to her chest. "I woke up John Beater. He said he'd heard it too. We got out of the tent to look around, and that's when we saw it. Standing at the edge of our camp, just watching us." "What did it look like?" "Like a cat, but wrong. Too big, too intelligent. It looked at us like it knew exactly what we were thinking. like it was enjoying our fear. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. John Beater grabbed a flashlight and shined it at the thing. It didn't run. It just stood there, looking back at us. Then it smiled. I swear to God, it smiled at us. She started rocking again, her voice getting higher and more frantic. John Beater threw a rock at it, trying to scare it away. But it just tilted its head like it was curious. Then it moved, so fast I couldn't follow it. 1 second it was 20 feet away, the next it was right in front of him. She stopped talking, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. I could see she was about to hyperventilate again. "It's okay," I said. "You're safe now. It can't get up here." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. The creature had shown intelligence, and intelligence meant adaptability. If it wanted us badly enough, it would find a way. Sarah's breathing slowed, and she continued her story. It didn't kill him right away. It played with him first, knocked him down, let him get up, knocked him down again, like a cat with a mouse. John Beater kept trying to fight back, but he might as well have been fighting a mountain. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm air. I ran. I left him there and I ran. I could hear him screaming behind me, but I just kept running. "I'm such a coward." "You're not a coward," I told her. "You survived. That's what matters." But she shook her head violently. It let me go. It wanted me to run. It was all part of the game. Before I could ask what she meant, I heard it. A sound like claws on wood, coming from below us. Something was at the base of the tower, and it was climbing. Sarah heard it too. Her eyes went wide, and she pressed herself further into the corner. "It followed us," she whispered. "It knew we'd come here." The scratching sound got closer, accompanied by a creaking that suggested the tower was swaying under additional weight. I looked out the window, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness below. Then something slammed into the side of the tower, hard enough to shake the entire structure. The windows rattled in their frames, and dust fell from the ceiling. Whatever was down there, it was testing the tower's stability. Another impact, this one from the other side. The tower swayed more noticeably, and I heard wood splintering somewhere below us. The creature was systematically attacking the support structure, trying to bring the whole thing down. I grabbed my knife and positioned myself between Camellia and the door. If the creature made it up here, I'd try to buy her time to escape. Though where she could go from 30 feet up, I had no idea. The impact stopped suddenly, and the tower stopped swaying. The silence was deafening, broken only by Camelia's ragged breathing and the thundering of my own heart. Then I heard it on the roof. Footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too heavy, too deliberate. It was up there, walking around directly above us. Dust fell from the ceiling with each step, and I could see the wooden beams flexing under the weight. Sarah had gone completely silent, not even breathing as far as I could tell. We both stared at the ceiling, following the sound of the creature's movement. It was pacing back and forth, like a predator in a cage. Suddenly, one of the ceiling boards cracked, not enough to break through, but enough to show that the wood was under more stress than it could handle. The creature was testing the roof, looking for weak points. I knew we didn't have much time. The tower was old, and it hadn't been designed to support something that heavy. If the creature kept applying pressure, it would eventually break through. I looked around the cabin, desperate for anything that might help. That's when I saw the trapdoor in the floor. It was partially hidden under debris, but I could make out the outline of a square cut in the floorboards. I cleared away the debris as quietly as I could, revealing a wooden panel with a rusty metal handle. It was probably an access hatch for maintenance, leading down into the tower's interior structure. It wasn't much, but it might give us another option if the creature broke through the roof. I lifted the panel carefully, wincing as it creaked on old hinges. Below was a narrow space filled with wooden beams and metal cables, the tower's internal framework. The footsteps above us stopped. In the sudden silence, I realized the creature had heard the trapdoor opening. It knew we were planning something. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. Then, without warning, the creature let out that sound again, the grinding, metallic roar that seemed to come from somewhere deep in its chest. It was a sound of frustration, of hunger, of something that had been denied its prey for too long. The attack, when it came, was explosive. The creature slammed into the roof with what must have been its full weight, and the wooden beams cracked like gunshots. Sarah screamed, and I saw a claw break through the ceiling, followed by another. The creature was tearing its way through the roof, splinters of wood flying everywhere. In the gaps between the boards, I could see something moving, a glimpse of matted fur and gleaming eyes. I grabbed Camellia and pulled her toward the trapdoor. "We're going down," I told her. "Move." She didn't argue. Together, we dropped through the opening into the tower's interior just as the creature finally broke through the roof. I heard it land in the cabin above us with a thud that shook the entire structure. We were in a narrow space between the tower's inner and outer walls, surrounded by wooden beams and metal cables. It was dark and cramped, but it was better than being in the same room as that thing. Above us, I could hear the creature moving around the cabin, searching for us. It made frustrated sounds, like a cat that had lost track of a mouse, but it knew we were still here somewhere. It was just a matter of time before it found us. I looked around our hiding place, trying to find another way out. The tower's structure was more complex than I'd realized, with multiple levels and access points. If we could make it to the bottom, we might be able to get back outside and run. But the creature was smart. It had probably already thought of that. It might be waiting for us at the bottom, or it might have positioned itself to cut off our escape route. Still, we couldn't stay here. The creature would eventually figure out where we were, and then we'd be trapped with nowhere to run. I helped Camellia navigate the narrow space, guiding her toward what looked like another access panel. Behind us, the sounds of the creature's search grew more frantic. It was losing patience. We reached the panel, and I slowly lifted it. Beyond was the tower's main support structure, a maze of wooden beams and metal brackets. If we could make it through without making noise, we might be able to reach the ground level. But as I started to climb through the opening, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The creature had found the trapdoor. It was coming after us. The creature's pursuit through the tower's interior was like being chased by a nightmare made manifest. I could hear it behind us, its claws scraping against wood and metal as it navigated the same narrow passages we were using. But where we had to squeeze and crawl, it seemed to flow like liquid darkness, its impossible anatomy allowing it to move through spaces that should have been too small. Camellia was moving on pure adrenaline now, her earlier shock replaced by desperate determination. She followed me through the maze of support beams without question, trusting me to find a way out. I only hoped I could live up to that trust. The tower's structure was more complex than I'd initially thought. There were multiple levels, each with its own access points and maintenance areas. We climbed down through a vertical shaft that had probably been used for running electrical cables, our hands and knees scraping against rough wood and rusty metal. Behind us, the creature's sounds grew closer. It was learning the tower's layout, adapting its pursuit to our route. Whatever intelligence guided it was far more sophisticated than any animal I'd ever encountered. We reached what I hoped was the bottom level, a cramped space filled with the tower's foundational supports. Through gaps in the wooden framework, I could see the forest floor about 10 feet below us. We were close to escape, but we'd have to go outside to reach the ground. I found an access panel that led to the tower's exterior ladder. It was our best shot at getting down safely, but it would also expose us to attack. The creature might be waiting outside, or it might follow us down the ladder. Either way, we couldn't stay here. The sounds of pursuit were getting closer, and I could hear wood splintering as the creature forced its way through obstacles. I opened the panel carefully, peering out into the darkness. The forest was quiet, but that didn't mean anything. The creature had proven it could move silently when it wanted to. "I'm going out first," I whispered to Camellia. "Wait for my signal, then follow. If something happens to me, run toward the trail. Don't look back." She nodded, her face pale but determined. Whatever breakdown she'd had earlier, she was fighting through it now. Survival instinct had taken over. I climbed through the opening onto the tower's exterior ladder. The wooden rungs felt solid enough, but I tested each one before putting my full weight on it. The last thing we needed was to fall and break something when we were so close to escape. The climb down seemed to take forever. Every shadow could hide the creature. Every sound could be the beginning of an attack. But I made it to the bottom without incident and gestured for Sarah to follow. She started down the ladder, moving carefully but steadily. She was about halfway down when I heard it, a sound like wood exploding, coming from inside the tower. The creature had reached the bottom level and was tearing through the walls to get to us. "Move!" I shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. Camellia dropped the remaining distance, landing hard but staying on her feet. We ran away from the tower, crashing through the underbrush without regard for noise or direction. Behind us, I could hear the creature emerge from the tower, its roar of frustration echoing through the forest. We ran blindly through the darkness, branches whipping at our faces and roots trying to trip us. I'd lost my flashlight somewhere in the tower, and we were navigating by moonlight and instinct alone. The creature was following us, but it wasn't rushing. It knew the forest better than we did, and it probably knew where we were going before we did. It was herding us, driving us toward some predetermined destination. I tried to change direction to break out of whatever pattern it was forcing us into, but the terrain worked against us. Thick stands of trees blocked our path, forcing us to follow natural corridors that led deeper into the forest. Camellia stumbled, and I caught her before she fell. She was exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and fear. I knew she couldn't keep this pace much longer, but I also knew we couldn't stop. "I can't," she gasped, her breathing ragged. "I can't run anymore." "You have to," I told her. "It's still behind us." But even as I said it, I realized something had changed. The sounds of pursuit had stopped. The forest was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not the expectant silence of a predator about to strike, but the cautious quiet of animals sensing that danger had passed. We stopped running, both of us breathing hard. I looked back the way we'd come, but saw nothing in the darkness. The creature was gone, but I didn't trust its absence. "Why did it stop?" Camellia whispered. "I didn't know, but I had a theory." We'd been running for what felt like hours, but it had probably only been minutes. In that time, we'd covered a lot of ground, moving away from the creature's territory and toward areas where other people might be. The creature was intelligent, and intelligence meant caution. It wouldn't risk exposing itself to potential witnesses or investigators. It preferred to hunt in isolation, where it could take its time and avoid complications. "We need to keep moving," I said. "Find the trail and get back to civilization." But finding the trail in the darkness was easier said than done. I'd lost my GPS unit along with my flashlight, and the forest looked the same in every direction. We could be walking in circles, or we could be heading deeper into the wilderness. Camellia was struggling to keep up, her earlier burst of energy fading. She'd been through more trauma than anyone should have to endure, and her body was shutting down in response. "I need to rest," she said, leaning against a tree. "Just for a minute." I wanted to keep moving, but I could see she was at the end of her strength. If I pushed her too hard, she might collapse completely, and if that happened, I'd have to choose between staying with her or going for help. "5 minutes," I said. "Then we move again." She nodded gratefully, sliding down the tree trunk to sit on the ground. I remained standing, scanning the darkness for any sign of the creature. The forest was starting to feel normal again, filled with the small sounds of insects and night birds that had been absent during our ordeal, but I wasn't ready to trust that normalcy. The creature had shown too much intelligence, too much cunning. It might be waiting for us to relax our guard before striking again. "Tell me about the trail," I said, trying to keep Camellia focused. "How did you and John Beater get here?" She thought for a moment, her mind obviously struggling to process recent events. "We parked at the trailhead near Miller Creek, hiked in on the main trail for about 6 miles, then turned off onto a smaller path that John Beater found on his GPS. Miller Creek. I knew that area. It was about 8 miles from where we'd started, but in rough terrain that could take hours to navigate. Still, it was a destination, something to aim for." "Do you remember which direction you turned off the main trail?" I asked. "North, I think, or maybe northeast. John Beater was the one with the compass. It wasn't much to go on, but it was better than wandering randomly. If we could find the main trail, we could follow it back to the trailhead. From there, it would be a short hike to my truck." "Time to move," I said, helping Camellia to her feet. We started walking again, trying to maintain a steady pace without exhausting ourselves. The forest was slowly becoming more familiar, the trees and terrain matching my memories of the area. We were heading in the right direction. It took us 3 hours to find the main trail, and another 2 to reach the trailhead. By the time we saw the parking area, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My truck was where I'd left it, dusty but intact. Camellia collapsed in the passenger seat while I started the engine, my hands shaking with exhaustion and relief. We drove in silence back to town, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I dropped Camellia off at the hospital, where she could get the medical attention she needed. She'd have to deal with the psychological trauma later, but at least she was alive. I went home, showered, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's face, its impossible anatomy and malevolent intelligence. I'd write my report, following standard procedure, but I knew what parts I'd have to leave out. Who would believe me? A monster in the forest, something that defied natural law and hunted humans for sport? They'd think I was suffering from shock, or that I'd been drinking on the job, so I'd stick to the facts that could be verified. 2 campers missing, 1 found dead, 1 rescued alive. Cause of death, animal attack. The details would be vague, clinical, safe, but I'd know the truth, and I'd never go back to that part of the forest again. Some things you just don't mess with. Out there in the wild, it's not always about survival. Sometimes it's about knowing when to run, when to accept that you're not the apex predator you thought you were. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, and I'd carry it with me for the rest of my life. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the depths of Coconino National Forest, waiting for the next pair of hikers to wander off the trail, waiting for the next opportunity to hunt, and there was nothing I could do about it except hope that the next search and rescue team would be luckier than I was, or smarter. When I finally filed my report, I sat at my desk for a long time afterward, staring at the sanitized version of events I'd created. It was all true, as far as it went, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that something was living in those woods, something that shouldn't exist, something that had turned a simple rescue mission into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I threw my gear in the back of my truck and sat on the tailgate, looking out at the forest in the distance. I laughed, but not because anything was funny. I laughed because what else was I supposed to do? They'd probably send another team out there eventually, when the next campers went missing. But it wouldn't be me. I'd make sure of that. Some searches aren't worth the risk. Some things are better left unfound, and some monsters are better left alone in the dark, where they belong. The forests of Nehemana aren't on any tourist maps. The locals avoid talking about them to outsiders, and the tribal elders warn their young to respect the boundary markers. I've been a ranger at the Nehemana Wilderness Preserve for 7 years now, and still, parts of these woods feel as foreign to me as the day I arrived. My cabin sits on the eastern shore of Lake Wanagi, a 40-minute drive from the nearest town of Rockridge. The Department of Natural Resources built it in the 1950s, all-weathered cedar and stone fireplace. The large windows face west, giving me a front-row seat to the sun dropping behind the mountains each evening, painting the lake in crimson and gold. Beautiful, yes, but beauty here is often a mask for something else. It started 3 weeks ago, when the temperature dropped unexpectedly for late August. I was making my usual rounds checking the eastern trails for storm damage after the previous night's rainfall. The preserve spans nearly 300,000 acres of dense forest, rugged mountains, and wetlands. My sector covers roughly a quarter of that. Most days, I don't see another human soul. The radio on my belt crackled. Ranger station to Unit 4. Unit 4, go ahead, I responded, pausing to take a drink from my canteen. We've got potential missing hikers. Family reported their son and his girlfriend haven't checked in. We're supposed to camp at Whitefish Point and return yesterday. Vehicle still in the north lot. I sighed. This happens every summer, inexperienced hikers underestimating the wilderness. Copy that. I'll sweep the Whitefish trails, send their details to my phone. Already done. Take caution. We've had reports of unusual animal activity in that sector. What kind of unusual? I asked. Static interrupted the response. Multiple dead deer found. Strange markings. Forestry Service is investigating. Say again? You're breaking up, but the connection was gone. I checked my phone. No service, as usual in the deeper parts of the preserve. I'd have to wait until I reached higher ground to download the missing hikers' information. The forest was unusually quiet as I hiked toward Whitefish Point. Normally, these woods are alive with sound. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. But that day, the silence hung heavy between the trees. Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the leaves. I found the first sign of trouble about 2 miles from Whitefish Point. A backpack, partially hidden beneath a fallen log. Inside, a water bottle, granola bars, a map of the preserve, and a wallet belonging to Adrian Reeves, age 24, from Minneapolis, one of our missing hikers. The backpack showed no signs of animal interference, just abandoned on the trail. I radioed in my discovery and continued forward, more alert now. That's when I noticed the tracks. At first glance, they resembled deer prints, but something was off. The spacing was wrong, the impression too deep in the soft earth, and they didn't move like deer tracks should. They followed the human footprints exactly, step for step, as if something had walked precisely where the hikers had walked. But hours later, I've tracked animals across these forests for years. I know the patterns of every creature that calls these woods home. These tracks belonged to nothing I recognized. The trail led away from the established path, deeper into the old-growth section of the forest where 1,000-year-old trees block out the sun. Few hikers venture here. It's not on any recreational maps, and we don't encourage visitation. The tribes who lived here before European settlement considered this section sacred ground. Night was approaching. Standard procedure dictates calling in backup before continuing a search in dangerous conditions, but something pushed me forward. The tracks were fresh, no more than a few hours old. If the hikers were lost or injured, waiting until morning could mean death. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth thicker. Twilight filtered through the canopy in weak, gray streams. I switched on my flashlight as I followed the tracks to a small clearing, and there I found their tent. It was intact, zipped up tight. Nothing seemed disturbed. A small fire pit showed the remains of their last cook fire, long cold. Their food was hung properly in a tree to avoid bear encounters. These hikers knew what they were doing. "Hello?" I called out. "Forest Service. Adrian, is anyone here?" My voice echoed back, swallowed by the trees. Nothing. I approached the tent and called again. When no response came, I unzipped the entrance. Empty. 2 sleeping bags laid out. A lantern. A paperback novel face down. A phone with a dead battery. Something caught my eye. A journal. Open to the last entry. Dated the previous evening. August 17, day 3 at Whitefish. Saw something strange today while fishing. A deer watching us from across the lake. It stood so still for so long that Mia thought it might be fake at first. But then it moved, and I swear it walked like, I don't know how to describe it. Like it was wearing the deer's skin but didn't know how to move right. Mia says I'm being dramatic. There's something else. We keep hearing whistling from the trees at night. Not birds, actual whistling, like someone trying to mimic a tune. It stops whenever we shine a light toward it. Tomorrow we head back. I'll be glad to leave. Something feels wrong about this place. I closed the journal and stepped back outside. The sun had nearly set now, painting the clearing in long shadows. I took out my radio to call in my location and findings. Nothing but static. I tried my phone again. No signal. As darkness settled over the forest, I realized I had 2 choices. Hike back in the dark or set up camp and continue the search at first light. Safety protocols suggested the latter, but something about the journal entry left me uneasy. That's when I heard it. A low melodic whistle coming from the trees to the north, the same direction the strange tracks led. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. The whistling stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. No insects, no night birds, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then, from behind me came the soft snap of a twig breaking underfoot. I spun around, my light catching a glimpse of something ducking behind a massive pine tree. Something tall and thin that moved too quickly to identify. "This is the Forest Service," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady as I unholstered my sidearm. "Identify yourself." The only answer was another whistle, this time from a completely different direction. Then another, from somewhere else entirely. I was surrounded. I'm trained for wilderness emergencies. 7 years patrolling these forests has put me face to face with aggressive bears, territorial moose, even a mountain lion once, but nothing in my training covered what to do when surrounded by unseen whistlers in the darkening woods. I made a tactical decision. "Adrian, Mia," I called out. "If you can hear me, I'm heading back to the main trail. Follow my voice or stay where you are. More rangers will come at first light." With my flashlight sweeping the trees and my sidearm ready, I began backing toward the path I'd taken into the clearing. The whistling followed, always just out of sight, moving from tree to tree. Something reflected my flashlight beam, 2 gleaming points about 6 feet off the ground behind a thicket of pines. Eyes. Too high for a deer, too far apart for a bear. I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked through the silence like thunder. The eyes disappeared. The whistling stopped. I didn't wait around. I turned and moved quickly down the trail, constantly checking behind me. The tracks I'd followed earlier seemed different now in the harsh beam of my flashlight. The deer prints more elongated, almost like human footprints attempting to mimic a deer's gait. After 20 minutes of fast hiking, I reached the established trail again. My radio crackled to life. "Unit 4, come in. We've lost contact for over an hour. What's your status?" I nearly collapsed with relief at the sound of a human voice. "Unit 4 here. I found the hikers' campsite, but no sign of them. There's something else out here. I'm returning to my vehicle." "Say again? Something else?" "I'll explain when I get back. Send a full search team at first light. I'm staying on the main trail." I made it back to my truck without further incident, though the feeling of being watched never left me. As I drove the forest access road back to my cabin, I tried to rationalize what I'd experienced. Possibly locals playing tricks, maybe even the missing hikers themselves, confused and frightened in the dark. But I couldn't shake the image of those tracks, or the height of those eyes watching me from the trees. Back at my cabin, I reported everything to headquarters. They promised a search team at dawn. I spent the night reviewing maps of the area, marking where I'd found the backpack and the campsite. Outside my windows, the dark forest pressed close, and occasionally, I thought I heard a distant whistling carried on the night breeze. The search team arrived at sunrise, 4 rangers and 2 search and rescue dogs. We gathered around my kitchen table, where I briefed them on yesterday's findings. "The tribal liaison should be here too," said Rivera, the most experienced ranger among them. "If we're going into the old growth section, she's meeting us at the trailhead," said Marshall, the team lead. "Apparently the elders have concerns about us entering that area." The liaison was waiting when we arrived, a middle-aged woman named Kimmy, with stern eyes and a weathered face. She greeted the others with familiar nods, but studied me with obvious reservation. "You're the one who went into the boundary lands alone?" she asked. "The boundary lands? The old forest. Beyond the trail markers. The place you shouldn't have entered, especially as night fell." "I was following tracks," I explained. 2 hikers are missing, she shook her head. The markers are there for a reason. Our people have respected those boundaries for generations. What exactly are we dealing with here? Marshall asked. Kimmy hesitated, looking around at our group. The elders call it Yi Naldlushi, the skinwalker, a witch that takes the form of animals to lure humans, but not perfectly. It can never quite get the movement right. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Rivera's nervous laugh. Well, we have a job to do. Superstitions aside, Kimmy's expression hardened. This isn't about superstition. It's about respect. Whatever you believe, that forest deserves caution. She handed each of us a small leather pouch. Keep this with you. It's white sage and juniper. For protection. I accepted mine without comment, tucking it into my pocket. The dogs picked up the scent from Adrian's backpack and led us down the same trail I'd followed the day before. Kimmy walked beside me. You saw something yesterday, she said. It wasn't a question. I saw eyes, heard whistling. She nodded as if confirming something to herself. The whistling is how it confuses prey. It can throw its voice, make you think it's everywhere at once. You really believe this? What I believe doesn't matter, but I respect what my grandparents taught me. The skinwalker gains power from fear. It plays with its food. The more frightened you are, the stronger it becomes. We reached the clearing with the tent. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, undisturbed. The dogs circled the area, sniffing excitedly but whining in confusion. They've got the scent, but it's all over, said the dog handler. Like they were pacing around this clearing for hours. One of the dogs suddenly froze, hackles raised, staring into the forest to the north, the same direction I'd heard the whistling from. A low growl rumbled in its throat. What is it, boy? The handler asked. But the dog wouldn't move. Kimmy and I exchanged glances. Without a word, she took out her pouch of herbs and sprinkled some on the ground between us and where the dog was staring. We should split up, Marshall decided. Cover more ground. Teams of 2. No, Kimmy and I said simultaneously. That's exactly what it wants, she added. Marshall looked skeptical but nodded. Fine, we stay together. Let's head north. Follow whatever the dogs are sensing. The path led us deeper into the old forest. The trees here were enormous, ancient giants that blocked out most of the sunlight. The ground was soft with centuries of fallen leaves, muffling our footsteps. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. The dogs found it first, a small clearing where the ground had been disturbed. As we approached, the metallic smell grew stronger. Blood. A deer carcass lay in the center of the clearing, but it was unlike any animal kill I'd ever seen. The skin had been removed almost surgically, in one piece, laid out flat beside the body. The flesh beneath was largely untouched. What could do this? Marshall whispered. Not what? Kimmy said quietly. Who? The dogs began barking frantically, pulling at their leashes toward a dense thicket at the far side of the clearing. The handler struggled to hold them back. There's something there, he said. I drew my sidearm as Marshall and Rivera approached the thicket with their rifles raised. They pushed aside the branches with their gun barrels. A young woman was curled in a fetal position among the roots of a massive tree. She was shivering violently, eyes wide and unfocused. Her clothes were torn and covered in dirt, but she appeared physically unharmed. Mia. I holstered my weapon and knelt beside her. Mia, I'm with the Forest Service. You're safe now. Her eyes finally focused on my face. It took Adrian, she whispered. It was wearing a deer, but wrong. Then it was wearing him. What do you mean? Marshall asked, but she just shook her head and began to sob. Where is Adrian now, Mia? I pressed gently. She pointed with a trembling finger toward the deeper forest. The lake. It took him to the dark lake. Kimmy grabbed my arm. Wakpa Sapa, the black water. It's a sacred place, forbidden, sacred or not. If Adrian's there, we need to find him, Marshall said. As we helped Mia to her feet, I noticed something clutched in her hand, a small carving of a deer made from dark wood. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. What's that? I asked. It left it for me, she whispered. Said it would come back wearing someone else. Said I wouldn't know who was real anymore. I tried to take the carving from her, but she wouldn't release it. We need to get her out of here, the handler said. She needs medical attention. Marshall nodded. Rivera, take her and one of the dogs back to the vehicles. The rest of us will continue to this lake. As Rivera led Mia away, she suddenly turned back. Don't trust what you see, she called to us. It can look like anyone now. The journey to Wakpa Sapa took us through the densest part of the forest I'd ever encountered. No marked trails existed here. The trees grew so close together in places that we had to turn sideways to pass between them. The canopy above was so thick that even at midday, we needed our flashlights. Kimmy led the way, moving with surprising speed and confidence through the labyrinthine woods. Marshall, the dog handler with our remaining search dog, and I followed single file. How much farther? Marshall called ahead after we'd been hiking for nearly 2 hours. Not far, Kimmy replied without slowing. The land changes near the water. You'll feel it before you see it. She was right. Gradually, the forest floor began to slope downward. The air grew cooler, heavier with moisture. The massive pines and oaks gave way to twisted, stunted trees covered in pale lichen. Mist crept along the ground, swirling around our ankles. The dog, which had been eagerly following Adrian's scent, suddenly stopped. Its ears flattened against its head, and it began to whine, backing up against its handler's legs. "What's wrong with him?" I asked. The handler looked concerned. "I've never seen him act like this. Something spooked him bad." From ahead, Kimmy called back. "We're here." We emerged from the trees onto the shore of a small, perfectly circular lake. The water was unnaturally still and dark, reflecting the surrounding trees like a black mirror. No birds called here. No insects buzzed. The silence was absolute. At the center of the lake was a tiny island, no larger than my cabin. A single dead tree stood upon it, its bare branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. "Wakpa Sapa," Kimmy said softly. "The black water. Our people never fish here, never drink from it, never swim in it." "Is there a way to the island?" Marshall asked, scanning the shoreline. "There used to be a fallen log that served as a bridge, but it rotted away years ago. Some say deliberately." The dog handler pointed to the far side of the lake. "Look there." A small rowboat was pulled up on the opposite shore, partially hidden among the reeds. "That's not supposed to be here," Kimmy said, her voice tight with tension. "No one comes here." "Well, someone did," Marshall replied. "Let's circle around." As we made our way around the perimeter of the lake, I noticed strange markings carved into some of the trees, symbols I didn't recognize. Kimmy saw me looking at them. "Warnings," she explained, "placed by shamans generations ago. They mark the boundary of safe passage." The boat was old but serviceable, big enough for 2 people at most. Scratched into the gunwale was a name, Adrian. "He came here before," I said. "This is his boat." "Or it wants us to think that," Kimmy countered. Marshall checked his radio. "No signal. We need to report this boat and get a full team out here." "There's no time," I said, looking at the island. Something about it pulled at me, a certainty that Adrian was there, alive or otherwise. "I'm going across." "Not alone," Marshall argued. "The boat only fits 2, I pointed out. "And someone needs to stay with the dog. He might be our only way to track back out of here." After some argument, it was decided that I would go, and Kimmy insisted on accompanying me. Marshall and the handler would wait with the dog and try to establish radio contact from higher ground. The small boat sat low in the water as Kimmy and I rowed toward the island. The surface of the lake was like oil, thick and resistant to our oars. No ripples spread from our passage. "Whatever happens on the island, don't separate from me," Kimmy said as we approached the shore. "It wants us to split up, to be alone." We pulled the boat up onto the rocky shore of the island. Up close, the dead tree was even more disturbing. Its bark blackened as if by fire, its twisted branches forming shapes that seemed almost deliberate, like a grotesque sculpture. At the base of the tree was a small opening, a hollow large enough for a person to crawl through. "A den," I said quietly. Kimmy took out her pouch of herbs and sprinkled some around the entrance. "If he's in there, he may not be Adrian anymore," she warned. I unholstered my sidearm and switched on my flashlight. "Adrian?" I called into the darkness. "Forest Service. We're here to help." A faint sound came from within. Not quite a voice, more like the rustle of movement. "I'm going in," I decided. "We go together," Kimmy insisted. The opening was tight. We had to crawl on our hands and knees, the beam of my flashlight illuminating a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into the earth. The walls were smooth, almost polished, unlike any natural formation I'd seen. The tunnel opened into a small chamber beneath the tree. The roots formed a natural ceiling above, dangling down like gnarled fingers. The air was stale, and carried the same metallic scent we'd encountered at the deer carcass. My flashlight beam caught something in the corner. A huddled figure. "Adrian," I called softly. The figure shifted, turning slowly toward us. It was a young man, his face pale, eyes wide with fear or shock. "You came," he whispered. "I knew you would." Something wasn't right. His movements were stiff, jerky, as if his joints didn't bend naturally. His voice had an echo to it, like 2 people speaking almost in unison. "Adrian, we're going to get you out of here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm while every instinct screamed danger. Kimmy's hand gripped my arm, her fingers digging in. "That's not him," she hissed. Adrian's head tilted at an impossible angle. "Not him?" His voice changed, deepened. "Then who am I?" He stood up, unfolding to his full height. But he kept unfolding, his limbs elongating, his spine arching backward until his head nearly touched the ceiling of roots. "Run!" Kimmy shouted, pulling me backward toward the tunnel. Not Adrian lunged forward with inhuman speed. I fired 2 shots, the sound deafening in the confined space. The bullets hit center mass, but he didn't even flinch. Instead, his face split in a grin that stretched literally from ear to ear, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. We scrambled backward through the tunnel, emerging onto the island. I could hear something large moving through the passage behind us. "The boat!" I shouted. We ran for the shore but stopped short. The boat was gone, now drifting in the center of the lake. "It planned this," Kimmy said. "It wants us trapped here." A horrible scraping sound came from the tunnel entrance. Not Adrian emerged, crawling on all fours like an insect, his limbs bent at unnatural angles. His skin seemed loose somehow, as if it didn't quite fit the body beneath. "The herbs," Kimmy said urgently. "Use the herbs." I fumbled for the pouch in my pocket as the creature that wasn't Adrian stalked toward us, circling like a predator. "You brought others," it said, its voice now a guttural rasp. "The real Adrian is with them now, wearing a uniform perhaps, or handling a dog. You don't know, do you? You can't tell what's real anymore." I scattered the herbs in a line between us and the creature. It hissed, stopping short of the barrier. "That won't last," it snarled. "Nothing keeps me out for long. What do you want?" I demanded. "Want?" It laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "I want what I've always wanted. To walk among you, to wear your skins, to be invited into your homes." It began to change before our eyes, the false Adrian skin sloughing away, revealing glimpses of something underneath that my mind couldn't quite process. Something ancient and wrong. "The tree," Kimmy whispered to me. "It's the anchor. It's how it stays in this world." I understood immediately. While the creature's attention was fixed on Kimmy, I sprinted toward the dead tree, pulling out my emergency flares. The creature screamed, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and lunged after me. I struck the flare and thrust it into the hollow at the base of the tree. The dry, ancient wood caught immediately. Fire spread upward with supernatural speed, engulfing the trunk in seconds. The creature thrashed and howled, its form fluctuating wildly between human, animal, and something unidentifiable. As the tree burned, it seemed to lose cohesion, its edges blurring like a bad photograph. Suddenly, gunshots rang out from across the lake. Marshall was firing from the shore, providing cover. Beside him, the real Adrian stood supported by the dog handler, weak but alive. "The boat!" Kimmy shouted, pointing. The rowboat was moving toward us, seemingly of its own accord. As it reached the shore, we saw ripples in the water behind it. Something was pushing it. We didn't question this stroke of fortune. As the creature writhed in agony, we jumped into the boat and pushed off from the island. The current carried us swiftly toward the mainland, away from the burning tree and the disintegrating horror. That was 3 days ago. Adrian is recovering in the regional hospital. He remembers little after being separated from Mia, just fragments of darkness and cold water. Mia refuses to speak about what happened, but won't let go of that wooden carving. The official report calls it a case of wilderness survival against exposure and hallucinations caused by toxic fungal spores found in the old-growth forest. A convenient explanation that everyone seems eager to accept. Everyone except me. I know what I saw. Last night, I woke to the sound of whistling outside my cabin window. Just a brief melody, then silence, and this morning, I found deer tracks on my porch. Perfect deer tracks, too perfect to be real. I've requested a transfer to another district. Until it's approved, I keep Kimmy's herbs with me at all times, and I never ever answer when I hear whistling in the dark. The rangers found my truck yesterday, parked at the Nahimana trailhead. They'll find this journal too, eventually. If you're reading this, know that I've gone back to the Blackwater. I have to be sure it's really dead, and if I don't return, watch the forests carefully, and never trust anything that moves wrong, even if it wears a familiar face. The Olympic National Forest has always been my sanctuary, a place where the endless stretch of pine and cedar creates a cathedral of solitude, where a man can disappear for days and return renewed. At least, that's what I'd always believed until September 3rd, 1999. I'm Colby Ewing, a middle school science teacher from Tacoma. That Friday afternoon, I loaded my truck with camping gear, my fishing tackle, and enough supplies for a weekend of solitary communion with nature. Work had been hell that week, budget cuts, standardized testing prep, and a particularly challenging group of 8th graders had left me desperate for escape. I took the wrong turn outside Aberdeen. That was my first mistake. The forest highway was familiar enough. I'd traveled it dozens of times in the 12 years I'd lived in Washington. But that day, my mind drifted as the asphalt ribbon unwound before me. The late summer sun filtered through the canopy and fractured beams, creating a hypnotic pattern that lulled me into a meditative state. I missed my turnoff, the one that would have led me to the established campgrounds near the Ketz River. Instead of doubling back, I continued forward, scanning for alternative routes. That's when I spotted it. A narrow dirt road veering eastward, unmarked on any official map. I'd left my detailed Forest Service map at home, relying on vague directions scribbled from an online forum post. Some guy had mentioned pristine fishing spots off the beaten path. Why not explore? I had supplies, plenty of gas, and the weather forecast promised clear skies. Adventure, I muttered, cranking the wheel and feeling the satisfying crunch of gravel beneath my tires. That was my second mistake. The road narrowed as I pushed deeper into the forest. What began as a two-lane dirt path gradually constricted until branches from either side scraped against my truck's paint. The GPS on my dashboard flashed, signal lost, the screen nothing but a digital void. I should have turned back then, but some strange compulsion urged me forward. The trees here were different, older, somehow more sentient. Their trunks were massive, gnarled with age, bark blackened with what looked like centuries of weathering. Thick moss draped from branches like funeral shrouds, creating an eerie stillness that absorbed all sound. I noticed how the wildlife had gradually disappeared. No birdsong, no scampering creatures, just silence. I'd been driving for nearly 2 hours when the daylight began to fade. September evenings come early in the Pacific Northwest, and beneath the dense canopy, twilight arrived prematurely. I flicked on my headlights, watching how the beams seemed swallowed by the darkness rather than cutting through it. That's when I saw the sign. Weathered wood, its paint peeling in long strips like diseased skin. Rosedale. 7 miles. I slowed the truck, frowning. Rosedale? I'd never heard of it, and I prided myself on knowing the Olympic Peninsula's geography. I taught Washington State history as part of my curriculum, after all. Yet here was a town, unmarked on any map I'd studied. I checked my watch. 6:37 p.m. Daylight was fading fast. I could either push forward toward this mysterious Rosedale, or attempt to navigate backward in growing darkness. Logic dictated I should find civilization, ask for directions, then head back to the main highway. The road grew increasingly primitive as shadows lengthened. My truck jostled over exposed roots and deep ruts. The trees pressed closer, their branches forming a tunnel overhead that blocked what little remained of daylight. I felt the forest watching me. Not the casual observance of nature, but something deliberate, calculating. I'm not what you'd call a risk-taker, but I'm no coward either. I've always been grounded, practical, a science teacher after all. I deal in observable facts, testable theories. But that evening, as darkness swallowed my vehicle, something primal stirred in me. A visceral knowledge that I had crossed some invisible boundary. The road curved sharply, then opened into a small clearing. My headlights swept across a weather-beaten sign, Rosedale, founded 1843. The letters were hand-carved, the edges softened by decades of rain and wind. Beyond it, there was nothing but more forest. I continued driving, gripping the steering wheel tighter as the road narrowed again. The branches above seemed to intertwine, creating a canopy so dense that it felt like driving through a tunnel. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness ahead, and the engine's growl echoed unnaturally, as if the sound couldn't escape the confines of the vegetation surrounding me. 7 miles. I muttered to myself. Should have reached it by now, but there was no town, no buildings, no signs of human habitation. Just endless forest and that oppressive silence. I glanced at my watch again, 8:24 p.m. I'd been driving for almost 2 hours since seeing the first sign. 7 miles should have taken 15 minutes even on this rough road. I was considering turning back when my headlights finally caught something ahead, a break in the endless wall of trees. The road opened into a small, overgrown clearing. In the center stood a cabin, its dark silhouette barely visible against the night sky. A faint light flickered behind one of its windows. Relief washed over me. Civilization, however modest, meant directions. It meant not spending the night lost in this increasingly unsettling forest. I had no idea then that finding that cabin would be my third and most terrible mistake. I parked my truck in what appeared to be a small, weed-choked parking area. Tall grass and saplings had reclaimed most of the gravel, suggesting that visitors were rare. As I killed the engine, the abrupt silence was disorienting. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. The stillness felt deliberate, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out. The air was thick, almost gelatinous, carrying a faint metallic scent beneath the expected pine and earth. My boots crunched on the gravel, the sound obscenely loud in the unnatural quiet. The cabin stood about 50 yards away, a dark, hulking shape against the night sky. A single window glowed with weak yellow light, as if from a candle or oil lamp rather than electricity. The structure seemed to hunch into itself, the roofline sagging in the middle like a spine deformed by age and gravity. As I approached, details emerged under my flashlight beam: warped clapboards, a porch listing dangerously to one side, windows filmed with decades of grime except for strange, clean streaks that looked like someone had dragged their fingers through the dirt. The front door hung slightly ajar, swaying almost imperceptibly though there was no breeze. I hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly reluctant. Something felt profoundly wrong about this place. The darkness surrounding the cabin seemed denser than natural night, as if the structure existed in its own pocket of shadow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and insubstantial. "Anyone home? I'm lost and could use some directions." No response came from within, just that flickering light, steady and unaffected by my presence. I climbed the steps, wincing at their protesting creaks. Each board seemed to groan with an almost human quality, like I was treading on something alive. The porch planks felt soft underfoot, rotted through in places. Standing before the door, I noticed strange markings carved into the weathered wood, symbols I didn't recognize, geometrical patterns that hurt my eyes when I tried to follow their logic. They seemed ancient, yet the cuts looked fresh, the exposed wood pale against the darkened surface. I knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed within. "Hello? I don't mean to disturb you, but I could really use some help." The door swung inward another few inches, revealing a slice of the interior. The movement wasn't the result of my knocking. It felt deliberate, an invitation. I should have returned to my truck then. Everything in my body screamed danger, but curiosity, that damnable human trait, pushed me forward. I eased the door open wider, the hinges wailing as if in warning. "Anyone home?" I called again, training my flashlight into the darkness beyond. The cabin consisted of a single large room with a small kitchen area in one corner. The source of light was an old oil lamp sitting on a crude wooden table in the center. Its flame danced steadily, casting long, writhing shadows across the walls. Furniture was sparse, the table with 2 chairs, a sagging couch against one wall, a pot-bellied stove in the corner covered with dust. The place smelled of mold and something else, a sweet, coppery scent that tickled the back of my throat. My flashlight beam revealed walls adorned with strange trophies, antlers twisted into unnatural shapes, animal skulls with too many eye sockets, bundles of dried plants that resembled no species I'd ever taught in my biology units. Most disturbing were the stains on the floorboards, dark splatters radiating outward from the center of the room like a gruesome Rorschach test. I didn't need my science background to recognize dried blood when I saw it. Yet most disturbing of all were the footprints, fresh ones, tracking through the dust on the floor. They came from somewhere in the back of the cabin, circled the table, and disappeared again. The prints were oddly shaped, too wide at the front, with toes that seemed too long and widely spaced. Not human. Not entirely. I backed toward the door, my earlier curiosity evaporating like morning dew. But before I could reach it, I heard a sound from outside, something moving around my truck. Heavy footsteps crunching on gravel, a low guttural breathing. I froze, caught between the unknown threat outside and the empty but disturbing cabin. The footsteps circled my vehicle, then began moving toward the cabin. My heart hammered against my ribs as I desperately scanned the room for a hiding place or weapon. That's when I noticed it. A trap door in the floor near the back wall, its outline barely visible beneath a threadbare rug that had been partially pushed aside. Fresh handprints in the dust surrounded it. The footsteps reached the porch. The old boards creaked under substantial weight. In blind panic, I darted behind the door, pressing myself against the wall. The footsteps stopped just outside. I could hear breathing, wet, labored, as if through malformed lungs. A shadow fell across the threshold, impossibly large and strangely proportioned. I held my breath, my fingers white-knuckled around my flashlight, the only potential weapon I had. The shadow withdrew. The footsteps moved away, circling around to the side of the cabin. I exhaled shakily, my legs trembling with adrenaline. That moment of relief was shattered by a tremendous crash from the rear of the cabin. The sound of glass breaking, wood splintering. Something had forced its way in through a back window or door. I bolted for the front door, but before I could reach it, a massive form hurtled through the shadows and slammed into me from behind. I crashed to the floor, the impact knocking the flashlight from my grip. It rolled away, its beam creating wild dancing shadows as it spun. A weight pressed down on my back, hot, fetid breath against my neck. Rough hands flipped me over, and I found myself staring up into a face that would haunt me for the rest of my days. The face hovering above mine belonged to a man, if that word could still apply. His features were a grotesque parody of humanity, as if someone with only a passing familiarity with human anatomy had attempted to sculpt a face from clay. His jaw jutted too far forward, misaligned and oversized, filled with jagged teeth spaced unevenly like broken fence posts. His nose had collapsed into a flat, porcine snout with flared nostrils that dripped constantly. But it was his eyes that truly horrified me. Bulbous, yellowish orbs that protruded slightly from deep-set sockets, with pupils that contracted into vertical slits in the lamplight. He wore no shirt, exposing a torso covered in a patchwork of scars, some surgical in their precision, others ragged and infected-looking. His skin had an unhealthy pallor, like meat left too long in a refrigerator, and seemed to hang loosely on his frame as if it belonged to a larger person. He made a sound, not speech, but a series of clicks and wet gurgles that originated somewhere deep in his malformed throat. His breath washed over me, smelling of rot and raw meat. I struggled beneath him, but his strength was extraordinary. One hand pinned both my wrists above my head while the other explored my face with disturbing curiosity, dirty fingernails tracing my features as if memorizing them. "Let me go!" I shouted, my voice cracking with terror. "Please, I'm just lost. I didn't mean to trespass." The creature, I couldn't think of him as a man anymore, tilted his head at the sound of my voice, eyes widening with what might have been delight. He mimicked my mouth movements silently, then leaned closer, inhaling deeply as if savoring my scent. From the shadows at the edges of the room, movement caught my eye. Two more figures emerged, drawn by my shouts. They were similarly deformed, but with variations that suggested different strains of the same sickness. One was rail-thin, limbs elongated to impossible proportions, joints bulging like tumorous growths. The other was squat and powerful, with a torso too broad for its stunted legs, forcing it to waddle rather than walk. All three wore remnants of clothing, torn jeans, fragments of flannel shirts, suggesting they had once been ordinary people, or at least had access to human habitation. But whatever humanity they might have once possessed had long since been buried beneath physical deformity, and I was beginning to realize mental degradation. The one pinning me made another series of guttural sounds. The thin one responded with similar noises, approaching with a shuffling gait. Together they hauled me to my feet, their grips bruisingly tight. "What do you want?" I gasped, still struggling despite the futility. "Please, I have money in my truck. Take it, take anything." The squat one let out a sound that might have been laughter, a wheezing, phlegmy bark that sent shivers down my spine. It approached, reaching out with hands that seemed too large for its arms, fingers splayed to reveal thick, yellowed nails that curved like claws. My scientific mind, even in the midst of terror, couldn't help but analyze. These weren't merely inbred hillbillies or backwoods degenerates. Their deformity suggested something else. Genetic manipulation, perhaps, or extreme mutation from environmental toxins. As a biology teacher, I recognized the signs of developmental abnormalities too severe to be explained by simple inbreeding. The one holding my right arm sniffed at my shoulder, then licked my neck with a tongue that felt rough like sandpaper. I recoiled, but couldn't escape the violation. It made an appreciative sound, then gestured toward the back of the cabin, the trapdoor. They were taking me to the trapdoor. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "No, you can't do this. People will look for me. The school, my sister, they know where I was going." This was a lie. No one knew my exact route. I had told my sister I was heading to the Olympics for the weekend, but hadn't specified where. I was a grown man on a solo camping trip. No one would miss me until Monday at the earliest. My captors seemed unimpressed by my bluff. The first one, the one with the misshapen jaw that I was beginning to think of as their leader, stepped to the center of the room and knelt beside the partially exposed trapdoor. He hooked gnarled fingers around a metal ring and heaved upward. The door lifted with a groan of protesting hinges, revealing a rectangle of perfect darkness below. A rush of fetid air escaped, carrying with it a stench so profound that I gagged immediately, the unmistakable smell of decay, of flesh left to rot in enclosed spaces. I fought then, with the desperate strength of someone who knows what awaits them is worse than death. I managed to wrench one arm free, swinging wildly and connecting with the thin one's face. It squealed, a high, pig-like sound, and staggered back, but the squat one immediately seized my freed arm, bending it behind my back until I felt something pop in my shoulder. White-hot pain lanced through me, momentarily blinding. When my vision cleared, they were dragging me toward the open trapdoor. I could see nothing below, just an impenetrable darkness that promised horrors beyond imagination. "Help!" I screamed, knowing it was useless but unable to stop myself. "Somebody help me," my voice echoed in the cabin, mocking me with its futility. There was no one for miles who could hear, no one except these things that had once been human. The leader descended first, climbing down what appeared to be a crude ladder. The other two maneuvered me to the edge, forcing me to look down into that lightless pit. The leader had disappeared completely, but I heard him moving below, and then a faint light bloomed, another oil lamp being lit. What it revealed turned my blood to ice. The basement stretched beneath the entire cabin, a cavernous space with a packed earth floor and rough stone walls that glistened with moisture. But it wasn't the structure itself that horrified me. It was what they'd done with it. The chamber was a charnel house, a museum of human suffering curated by minds that had slipped far beyond sanity. Bones were everywhere, not scattered haphazardly, but arranged with perverse artistic intent. Femurs and tibias had been lashed together to form lattice-like structures against the walls. Rib cages hung from the ceiling like macabre chandeliers. Skulls had been stacked into precarious towers in the corners, their empty eye sockets seeming to watch my descent with hollow sympathy. At the center of this ossuary stood a metal table, an operating table, I realized with mounting horror. Its surface was stained dark with substances I refused to name, and leather restraints hung from each corner. Surrounding it were crude surgical instruments arranged on a smaller table, rusted saws, hammers, chisels, a collection of knives ranging from hunting blades to what looked like a butcher's cleaver. As my feet touched the earth floor, my knees buckled. Only the iron grips of my captors kept me upright. The stench was overwhelming. Feces, urine, blood, and the sweet sour smell of decomposition formed a miasma so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Against one wall stood a row of large glass jars, their contents floating in cloudy liquid. Even in the dim light, I could make out human organs, hearts, livers, what might have been brains. Some contained things I couldn't identify, masses of tissue with hair or teeth growing from impossible places. "Please," I whispered, no longer shouting. There was no point. "Why are you doing this?" The leader approached me slowly, his misshapen head tilted in what might have been curiosity. He reached out and pinched the flesh of my forearm, nodding appreciatively at its elasticity. Then he made that series of clicks and gurgles again, addressing the others. They responded with similar sounds, and then began dragging me toward the metal table. I fought again, but my injured shoulder screamed with pain at the slightest resistance. Still, terror gave me strength. I managed to slam my boot into the knee of the thin one, causing it to release my arm with a shriek. For a brief, wild moment, I thought I might break free. But the leader's hand shot out, closing around my throat with crushing force. He lifted me off the ground by my neck, and slammed me down onto the metal table. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, left me gasping and disoriented as they secured the leather restraints around my wrists and ankles. Panic exploded through me, a nuclear blast of adrenaline that accomplished nothing against the unyielding bindings. I thrashed and bucked, the table creaking beneath me but holding firm. The leather bit into my skin as I strained against it, blood slicking my wrists. The three creatures moved around the table, examining me with the detached interest of scientists studying a specimen. The leader prodded my chest, my stomach, my thighs, making appreciative noises. The thin one hovered near my head, its elongated fingers tracing the contours of my face, lingering over my eyes in a way that made me clench them shut in terror. The squat one had moved to the instrument table and was methodically testing the edges of the knives, holding them up to the lamplight, selecting and discarding various options like a chef preparing for a complex dish. My mind flooded with grotesque images. These creatures butchering me alive, harvesting my organs while I screamed, adding my bones to their grisly collection. Were they going to eat me? Experiment on me? Both? The leader leaned close, his face inches from mine. His breath was hot, moist, reeking of putrefaction. He opened his mouth, revealing a tongue that had been split down the middle like a snake's. From his throat came a sound, not the clicks and gurgles of before, but an attempt at speech. "Inner," he rasped, the word malformed but unmistakable. I felt something warm spreading beneath me, and realized with distant shame that I'd lost control of my bladder. The leader noticed too, wrinkling his nose in disgust. "Please," I begged, my voice barely audible. "I'm a teacher. I have students, people who care about me." He tilted his head, and for a brief, insane moment I thought I saw something like recognition flicker in those inhuman eyes, a remnant of empathy perhaps, buried beneath years of devolution. But then it was gone, replaced by a hungry gleam that extinguished any hope. He straightened and gestured to the squat one, who approached with a wicked-looking boning knife. The leader took the knife, testing its weight in his hand. He brought it to my cheek, pressing just hard enough to dimple the skin without breaking it. His eyes watched my reaction with clinical interest. Please don't, I whispered. He dragged the knife down to my throat, then to my chest, stopping over my heart. I could feel its point through my shirt, a single sharp pressure that threatened to become the first of many mortal wounds. I closed my eyes, certain these would be my final moments. 28 years old, a middle school science teacher who'd taken a wrong turn and ended up as dinner for whatever these things were. I thought of my classroom, my students, my small apartment with its dying houseplants. I thought of all the places I'd never see, the life I'd never live. Then came a sound that didn't belong. A tremendous crash from upstairs, like something heavy being thrown against a wall. All three creatures froze, their heads swiveling toward the ceiling in perfect unison. Another crash, followed by heavy footsteps moving across the cabin floor above us. Then a voice. Human, male, commanding. Get the hell out here. The creatures exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to something that looked remarkably like fear. The leader barked a series of sounds that could only be orders. The thin one immediately scrambled up the ladder, while the squat one retreated into the shadows of the basement, disappearing behind what looked like a crude door set into the stone wall. The leader hesitated, looking down at me with what might have been regret. The knife hovered over my chest for a moment longer. Then, with a frustrated growl, he dropped it onto the floor and followed the thin one up the ladder. I lay there, still bound to the table, heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. Above me I could hear movement, heavy thuds, a crash of breaking glass, guttural cries that didn't sound entirely human, then silence. Complete, terrifying silence. I strained against my bonds again, the adrenaline giving me renewed strength, but the leather held fast. Blood trickled down my hands where the restraints had rubbed my skin raw. Hello? I called, my voice hoarse. Is anyone there? Please, help me. For a long moment, nothing. Then footsteps, moving deliberately across the floor above. They stopped at the trap door. I held my breath, unsure whether to expect rescue or the return of my tormentors. A beam of light cut through the darkness, a powerful flashlight, not the weak glow of the oil lamps. It swept across the basement, illuminating the horrors in stark detail before finding my face. Jesus Christ, a voice muttered. Down the ladder came a man, a normal human man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, with a rifle slung across his back. His face was weathered, lined with age and experience, framed by a salt and pepper beard. He looked to be in his 50s, with a lean, tough build of someone who lived an active outdoor life. He crossed to the table in 3 long strides, his flashlight revealing the full extent of the butcher shop I'd been destined for. Hold on, he said gruffly, setting the flashlight on the edge of the table. I'll get you out of this. His hands worked quickly, loosening the restraints with practiced efficiency. As my right wrist came free, I gasped at the pain in my shoulder, which had swollen to twice its normal size. Dislocated, the man said, examining it briefly. We'll deal with that once we're clear of this place. Can you walk? I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. As he freed my ankles, I sat up slowly, wincing at the various pains making themselves known throughout my body. Who are you? I managed to ask. What were those things? Name's Greer, he said, helping me stand with a firm hand under my good arm. And as for them, let's just say they're a local problem I've been dealing with for a while. I swayed on my feet, suddenly lightheaded. Greer steadied me, then guided me toward the ladder. Up you go, he urged. Quick as you can. They might come back with others. The word sent a fresh wave of terror through me. How many more of these creatures existed in these woods? Climbing one-handed was awkward and painful, but fear gave me strength. I emerged into the cabin, which now showed signs of a violent struggle. Overturned furniture, splashes of dark fluid on the walls that I suspected wasn't human blood. Greer followed, scanning the room with narrow eyes before gesturing toward the door. My truck's outside, we need to move now. I didn't need to be told twice. The night air hit me like a blessing, cool and clean after the fetid atmosphere of the basement. I gulped it down in desperate breaths as Greer led me across the clearing toward 2 vehicles, my truck and an older model Ford pickup with a brush guard and off-road lights mounted on the roof. What about my truck? I asked, my voice still unsteady. Greer shook his head. Leave it. Keys in it? I nodded. They'll strip it for parts by morning. Nothing you can do about that now. He opened the passenger door of his truck and helped me climb in, then circled around to the driver's side. The interior smelled of tobacco and gun oil, with a hint of something medicinal. The back seat was a cluttered arsenal, rifles in a rack, boxes of ammunition, what looked like homemade explosives carefully packed in wooden crates. As Greer started the engine, I caught movement at the edge of the clearing, shadowy figures emerging from the tree line, more than the 3 I'd encountered. much more. They moved with that same strange gait, some crawling on all fours, others lumbering with asymmetrical steps. In the truck's headlights, their deformities were briefly, horribly illuminated. Faces that weren't faces, limbs bent at impossible angles, skin conditions that defied medical classification. "Don't look at them," Greer advised, throwing the truck into reverse and executing a rapid three-point turn. "It only gets worse the more you see." I couldn't help myself. As we pulled away, I watched through the side mirror as they converged on the cabin, at least a dozen misshapen forms, each uniquely horrific, moving with the coordinated purpose of a hunting pack rather than mindless savages. "What happened to them?" I asked as we bounced down the rutted road, Greer driving at dangerous speeds through the darkness. They were almost human." Greer's face was grim in the glow of the dashboard lights. "They were human once. Some still are, in ways that matter." He glanced at me. "You're a city boy, aren't you?" I nodded. "Tacoma. I'm a middle school science teacher." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Science, huh? Then maybe you've heard of the Rayonier paper mill that operated near here from 1929 to 1968. The name was vaguely familiar from my environmental science lessons. Wasn't there some controversy about chemical dumping?" "Controversy," Greer snorted. "That's one way to put it. They dumped tons of mercury dioxins and experimental chemical compounds into the watershed for decades. Official story was that it all got cleaned up in the 70s. He navigated a particularly treacherous curve, the truck's tires sliding on loose gravel. But some of that stuff seeped deep into the groundwater, contaminated wells for miles around." I winced as we hit a pothole, sending a jolt of pain through my injured shoulder. "You're saying chemical exposure caused those mutations?" "Partly," Greer said, "but there's more to it. The people of Rosedale were already isolated, a tight-knit community that didn't mix much with outsiders. When the first birth defect started showing up in the 50s, they didn't seek help, turned inward instead. Started seeing themselves as different, special even. But they were eating people," I said, the horror of the basement still vivid in my mind. Greer was silent for a moment, navigating the truck through a particularly dense stretch of forest. "That came later. By the 70s, the deformities were getting worse with each generation. Medical care was non-existent. Mental deterioration followed the physical changes. They started to develop their own belief system. Thought consuming outsiders would somehow purify their bloodline, reverse the damage." "That's insane," I whispered. "Is it?" Greer glanced at me. "Plenty of cultures have believed in consuming enemies to gain their strength. The Rosedale folks just took it to an extreme. By the 90s, they'd abandoned most technology, living like primitives in these woods. County authorities pretend they don't exist. Easier that way. No official recognition means no responsibility." We had been driving for nearly an hour, the forest gradually thinning, the road improving. My shoulder throbbed in time with my heartbeat, but the pain was almost welcome, a reminder that I was alive, that I had escaped. "How did you know?" I asked. "How did you know I was there?" Greer's expression darkened. "Been tracking them for years. My daughter disappeared hiking through here in 1991. Police said she probably got lost, died of exposure. But I knew better." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Found evidence of her in their camp 6 months later. Since then, I've been monitoring their movements, trying to prevent others from suffering the same fate." The implication was clear. He hadn't saved everyone. I wondered how many travelers like me had ended up as bones in that basement, as organs floating in murky jars. "You live out here?" I asked. He nodded. "Cabin about 20 miles east. Close enough to keep an eye on them, far enough to stay safe." He glanced at me. "We'll fix that shoulder there, then I'll drive you to Aberdeen in the morning." I swallowed hard, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization of how close I'd come to death. "Thank you. I don't know how to—" "Don't," he interrupted. "Just be more careful next time. Stick to marked trails. Carry a good map. Tell someone exactly where you're going." We drove in silence for a while, the truck's headlights cutting through the darkness, revealing glimpses of normal forest now. Healthy trees, occasional wildlife startled by our passing. My mind kept returning to the basement, to the fate I'd narrowly avoided. "What will happen to them?" I finally asked. "To the people of Rosedale." Greer's face was impassive, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "They won't be bothering anyone else for a while." The certainty in his voice raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Had he done more than just rescue me? What had happened in those moments I'd been alone in the basement? We emerged from the forest onto a proper gravel road. In the distance, I could see the glow of Aberdeen's lights against the night sky. Civilization, normality, the promise of safety. But I knew something had fundamentally changed within me. The world I'd returned to would look the same, my classroom, my students, my mundane daily routines. But I would never again feel the same security in the established order of things. I had glimpsed something that existed at the edges of society, in the shadows we pretend don't exist. "Will you report this?" Greer asked, breaking the silence. "To the authorities?" I considered the question. Who would believe me? A story about deformed cannibals living in the Olympic National Forest, descendants of a forgotten town mutated by chemical waste. At best, they'd think I was suffering from trauma or hallucinations. At worst, they might question my mental stability, my fitness to teach children. "No," I said finally. "I don't think I will." Greer nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Probably for the best. Telling the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just makes you look crazy." As we approached the outskirts of Aberdeen, I watched the forest recede in the side mirror. Somewhere in that darkness, the creatures of Rosedale continued their isolated existence, hunting, feeding, multiplying, and one man waged a solitary war against them, driven by grief and a desire for justice the law couldn't provide. "Will I be safe?" I asked suddenly. "Will they come looking for me?" Greer shook his head. "They stick to their territory. Once you're out of these woods, you're out of their hunting grounds." He paused, then added, "But I wouldn't come back to this part of the Olympics if I were you. Some places aren't meant for visitors." I nodded, wincing as another jolt of pain shot through my shoulder. "I don't think that will be a problem." As we pulled into Aberdeen, the familiar sights of civilization, street lights, gas stations, fast food restaurants, seemed suddenly precious, fragile. How thin the veneer of normality really was. How easily it could be peeled back to reveal horrors beneath. I never returned to that part of the Olympic National Forest. I gave up my weekend hiking trips entirely, preferring the safety of city parks and well-traveled trails. Sometimes, on dark nights when sleep eludes me, I find myself thinking about Rosedale and its inhabitants, once human, now something else, and about Greer, the silent guardian who continues his lonely vigil in the wilderness. And I wonder how many other places like Rosedale exist in the shadows of our ordered world. Pockets of wrongness we pretend not to see, inhabited by those who have fallen through the cracks of humanity. I took a wrong turn outside Aberdeen. That was my first mistake, but unlike many others who made the same error, I lived to tell the tale. My name is Ahanu, which means he fights, in the language of my Cherokee ancestors, but I've spent most of my life trying to avoid confrontation. That's part of why I took this job as a park ranger, patrolling the vast expanses of wilderness in Wenatchee National Forest. I wanted to get away from the noise and chaos of the city, from the constant reminders of my failed marriage and mounting debts. Out here, among the towering evergreens and craggy peaks, I finally found a measure of peace. At least, that's what I thought. But there are older, darker things that dwell in these ancient woods, forces that have existed long before man ever set foot here. And now, I fear I've awoken one of them. It started with the reports of missing hikers. Every year we get a handful of folks who wander off trail and lose their way. Most of the time we find them within a day or two, hungry and dehydrated but no worse for wear. But this was different. In the past month, a dozen people have vanished without a trace, swallowed up by the ravenous forest. The other rangers and I have searched high and low, combing every inch of the 1.7 million acre woods, but not a single clue has turned up. It's as if they were plucked from the earth by some unseen force. The local Wenatchee tribe whispers of an ancient evil that lives in the heart of the forest. They call it Skinwalker, a malevolent shape-shifting spirit, neither animal nor man. For generations they've warned against venturing too deep into Skinwalker's territory. But their ancestral wisdom carries little weight these days. The world has moved on, dismissing their beliefs as silly native superstitions. I'm not sure what to believe anymore. My rational mind rebels against the idea of spirits and monsters, and yet I cannot shake the deep sense of unease that has settled into my bones. Each night I toss and turn in my small cabin, unable to sleep, my dreams haunted by twisted images of grasping branches and unseeing eyes. Something is out there in woods, watching and waiting. I can feel its presence, like a splinter in my mind, and I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the call came in. Another hiker gone missing, this time a young woman named Jessica Hartman. She'd set out alone to summit Dirtyface Peak 2 days ago. Her roommate got worried when she never made it home and wasn't responding to texts. I splashed cold water on my face and downed a cup of black coffee before heading out to join the search party. With each passing disappearance, a sense of grim resignation had settled over the ranger station. We still went through the motions, but I could see it in the empty eyes and tight jaws of my coworkers, the unspoken acknowledgement that We were fighting a losing battle against an enemy we didn't understand. The mood was somber as our convoy of SUVs wound its way up the narrow dirt roads, pale beams of headlights barely cutting through the gray pre-dawn gloom. Fallen leaves twirled and eddied in our wake. Summer had passed into autumn seemingly overnight, the vibrant greens of the forest canopy fading into muted shades of ochre and rust. The season of death was upon us. We established a base camp on a ridge near the trailhead and split up into teams to cover more ground. I set out alone, the crunch of my footfalls muted by the thick carpet of humus. An unearthly quiet suffused the woods, the usual chirps and chatter of wildlife replaced by an oppressive stillness. Only the soft sighing of the wind through bare branches broke the silence. I followed the trail as it switchbacked up a steep slope, stopping periodically to scan the understory for any sign of disturbance. It was grueling work, and sweat plastered my uniform to my back despite the chill in the air. With each fruitless hour that ticked by, a seething frustration built in my gut. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't quell the feeling that Jessica was still out here somewhere, waiting for me to find her, that I was her only hope. Around midday, I crested a rise and found myself at the edge of a small clearing. Sunlight lanced down through a gap in the branches above, casting the glade in an eerie, vaguely unsettling glow. That's when I saw it. There, nearly concealed in the deep shadows at the base of a massive, gnarled oak tree, was the tattered remains of a light blue backpack, a trail of my own. With a rising sense of trepidation, I approached the tree. Up close, I could see that the backpack had been shredded, torn apart by what appeared to be jagged claws. Viscous, dark liquid stained the nylon, and a few strands of long blonde hair clung to the zipper. No doubt it was Jessica's pack. I took a shaky breath, trying to quell the panic rising up in my throat. I knew I should radio this in, call for backup, but some reckless impulse compelled me forward. I had to know what happened to her. I spotted a disturbance in the undergrowth leading away from the clearing. Snapped branches and trampled vegetation cut a swath through the forest, as if something large had crashed through in a frenzy. Heart pounding, I followed the makeshift path deeper into the woods, blood roaring in my ears. The rational part of my brain screamed for me to turn back, but it was drowned out by a mounting sense of dread. I felt like I was being pulled along on a string, an inexorable force drawing me onward to some dark revelation. The trail ended abruptly at the mouth of a small cave, a black void cut into the hillside. Musty, stale air wafted out from the depths, carrying with it an unidentifiable stench that made my gorge rise. Every instinct urged me to flee, to get as far away from this place as possible, but I knew I couldn't turn back now, not without answers. With trembling fingers, I unclipped the flashlight from my belt and flicked it on. The weak beam did little to penetrate the gloom. Steeling myself, I ducked into the low entrance of the cave, the dank chill lifting goosebumps on my arms. The smell grew stronger as I pushed deeper into the bowels of the earth. It was a noxious melange of decay and ammonia, like a slaughterhouse floor. The tunnel twisted and turned, the uneven floor threatening to turn an ankle with each step. Oily water dripped from the ceiling, pattering onto my head and shoulders. Suddenly, the walls fell away and I found myself standing in a small chamber. As my light swept the room, the beam froze on a huddled shape in the corner. Bile burned the back of my throat. It was Jessica, or rather, what was left of her. Her body had been mangled nearly beyond recognition, limbs bent at unnatural angles, her abdomen a gaping ruin of tattered flesh. Clouded, lifeless eyes stared out from a face frozen in a rictus of terror, and all around her, covering the earthen walls and floor, was a latticework of deep, ragged gouges, claw marks. I expelled the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding in an explosive gasp, and in that moment of stunned horror, I glimpsed a movement in my peripheral vision, something huge and dark, detaching itself from shadow. Something with gleaming yellow eyes and far, far too many teeth. A scream locked behind my ribs as I spun to face the creature. But it was too late. An enormous, furred shape lunged from the darkness in a blur of rippling muscle and flashing claws. The last thing I saw was a cascading tangle of matted fur and the glint of canine teeth as long as my forearm. Then a crushing weight slammed into my chest and the world went black. Consciousness returned slowly, a gradual surfacing from the depths of oblivion. The first thing I became aware of was pain, a deep, pervasive ache that radiated through my entire body. It felt like I'd been run over by a truck. I tried to move and instantly regretted it as a lance of agony tore through my skull. The coppery taste of blood coated my tongue. Gingerly, I reached up to probe the tender spot on the back of my head. My fingers came away sticky and red. It took a few moments for the memories to come flooding back. The cave, Jessica's mutilated corpse, the attack. I bolted upright, adrenaline overriding the throbbing in my temples. I had to get out of here. Had to warn the others about what I'd seen, but as I staggered to my feet, I realized I was no longer in the cave. I found myself standing in the center of a small grove, the trees pressing close on all sides like a living wall. The air was preternaturally still, without even the faintest whisper of a breeze. An unnatural, sourceless light suffused the clearing, casting no shadows. It was deeply, profoundly wrong. That's when I noticed the symbols. They were carved into the trunks of the surrounding trees, intricate spirals and jagged runes that seemed to writhe and dance in the eerie glow. Some small, detached part of my brain recognized them as similar to the claw marks from the cave. As I turned in a slow circle, ice settled into the pit of my stomach. I was in the heart of Skinwalker's lair. A guttural growl sounded from the trees behind me. I whirled around to see the creature emerging from the brush. It moved with a sinuous, looping grace, muscles rippling beneath a pelt of shaggy sable fur. Baleful yellow eyes bored into mine with a shocking intelligence, and its lips curled back to reveal a mouthful of dagger-like teeth. In that moment, I knew with sickening certainty that I was going to die. There was no escape, no fighting this thing. It would toy with me, savoring my terror, before ripping me apart like it had Jessica. Despair crashed over me and I sank to my knees, legs no longer able to support my weight. As if sensing my surrender, Skinwalker stalked closer, a low rumble building in its cavernous chest. It began to pace around me in a tightening spiral. There was an almost ritualistic feel to its movements, like a predator performing some primal, pre-kill rite. The growl deepened, black lips peeling back to expose pink gums. With dreamlike calm, I watched as the creature tensed, coiling to spring, the inevitability of my own death washing over me. A distant part of me hoped it would be quick. Then Skinwalker launched itself at me in a flash of obsidian fur and ivory fangs. Knowing it was futile, I reflexively threw my arms up in front of my face, and the world exploded in a blaze of searing, agonizing pain. When I opened my eyes again, Skinwalker was gone. Only the shredded, bloody remains of my uniform bore mute testimony to the attack. Somehow, impossibly, I was still alive. I stared at the ravaged flesh of my forearms, the skin flayed to ribbons. Already the wounds were scabbing over, an angry red lattice of scar tissue knitting together before my disbelieving eyes. I felt different. A howling maelstrom of savage, primal emotion boiled in my veins, rage and hunger and bloodlust tangled into a snarling Gordian knot. It was as if a switch had been flipped deep in my lizard brain. Some long-dormant aspect of my psyche dragged howling into the light. With rising panic, I realized what had happened, what Skinwalker had done to me. The old stories spoke of how the creature could infect others with its curse, either through a bite or a slash from its venomous claws. How it would transform them, twist them into its own image. I stumbled to my feet, staring down at my hands like they belonged to a stranger. My fingers had elongated into sharp, black-nailed claws. Coarse fur sprouted from my skin in patches. I could feel my bones shifting, warping beneath my flesh, muscles wrenching into new configurations. A scream tore itself from my throat, then deepened, roughened, into an animalistic roar, frantic. I cast about desperately for something, anything that could stop the change overtaking me. My gaze fell upon a gleam of silver in the dirt, my ranger badge, torn free during the attack. I snatched it up, the metal searing my skin like a brand. An idea born of blind panic and the last vestiges of my fading humanity seized me. I pressed the silver badge to my chest, gritting my teeth against the agonizing burn. Smoke curled up from my flesh, the stink of charred meat filling my nostrils. But I held it there, digging it in deeper, using the pain to tether me to my sense of self. I focused on my life before all of this, on who I was, a man, a ranger, a Hanu. I clung to my identity like a drowning man clinging to a lifeline, and, miraculously, it seemed to help. I could feel the beast within me receding, the tide of feral savagery slowly ebbing away. My heartbeat slowed, the world coming back into focus. I took a deep, shuddering breath, then another, each one a battle. The change had stopped, held at bay for the moment. But for how long? With the immediacy of the crisis past, my mind began to race. I couldn't go back. Not like this, not with this thing inside me. My life, my humanity, had been ripped away, replaced by a monster wearing my skin. What was I now? How long until this reprieve failed? Until I lost control? How many more would die at my hands? No, there was only one choice. I had to end this, had to destroy the curse at its source. I knew where I needed to go, what I had to do, even as some part of me quailed at the thought. I turned to face the direction of the cave, of Skinwalker, silver badge still clutched to my chest. I ran. I don't know how long or how far I ran. Time lost all meaning. the individual moments bleeding together until all that existed was the rhythmic pounding of my feet against the forest floor, the ragged sawing of my breath in my lungs. The curse imbued me with inhuman strength and speed, the trees blurring past in a smear of indistinct shapes. But even as my body hurtled forward, my mind raced along other tracks. Images strobed behind my eyelids, Jessica's sightless, staring eyes, the malevolent hunger in Skinwalker's gaze as it paced around me, the way my hands had warped into talons. Was this how it would end for me? As a feral, slavering beast, my humanity scoured away until nothing remained but an insatiable appetite for violence? The thought sent a spike of despair lancing through me. At some point, without my conscious direction, my headlong flight had turned towards the cave where this had all begun, where Jessica had met her grisly demise. Some primal instinct, some dark intuition told me that Skinwalker would be there, that it would be waiting for me. The curse called to its creator like a beacon, and I could no more resist its pull than I could command the tides. As I drew closer, a grim resolve settled over me, cold and implacable as a glacier. I would put an end to this, one way or another. Either I would destroy the creature that had taken everything from me, or I would die in the attempt. There could be no other outcome. I welcomed the icy certainty. It was clean and pure in its simplicity, cutting through the chaos of fear and pain and guilt roiling inside me. The yawning black mouth of the cave loomed ahead, and I slowed to a halt at its entrance. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this place of horror and death, but I quashed the fear ruthlessly. I had come too far to turn back now. The stench of carrion billowed out to greet me as I stepped into the darkness, the reek of rotting flesh so thick I could almost taste it on the back of my tongue. In the absolute blackness, my other senses sharpened to preternatural acuity. I could hear the scrabbling of tiny claws on stone, the drip of water, the thundering cadence of my own heartbeat. And beneath it all, a low, guttural growl that echoed from the depths of the cave. Skinwalker. I reached out with senses I didn't fully understand, felt the creature's presence uncoiling in the dark like an oily shadow. It had been waiting for me, just as I'd known it would be. I could feel the weight of its gaze, the cruel amusement and anticipation that seethed behind those glowing yellow eyes. "I'm here," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear that thrummed through me like a live wire. "Show yourself, you bastard." A rumbling growl was my only answer, the sound coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, rebounding off the close confines of the cave until I was bathed in it. Then, a patch of shadow detached from the wall and prowled forward, resolving into a nightmarish silhouette of hulking muscle and matted fur and far too many teeth. I raised my silver badge before me like a talisman, the metal cool and solid in my grip. I poured every ounce of determination, of defiance, into that gesture, brandishing it like a weapon. The badge had halted the curse's progression before. I could only pray it would prove an effective defense now, here at the heart of Skinwalker's domain. The creature stalked ever closer, its eyes lambent in the gloom, its strides unhurried and confident. I braced myself, preparing to dodge, to strike, to do anything to keep those scythe-like claws from finding my flesh again. But the attack never came. Instead, Skinwalker paused just outside the radius of my outstretched badge, lip curling to bare its fangs in a lupine approximation of a smirk. Then, to my horror, it began to change, its form rippling and flowing like mercury. Fur and snout and claws melted away, replaced by smooth copper skin and long dark hair. In the space of a heartbeat, the monster was gone. In its place stood a man, lean and naked, corded muscle moving beneath his skin like a snake coiling beneath the surface of still water. His features were sharp and angular, with high, prominent cheekbones and a blade of a nose. He looked like the missing link between man and wolf, feral and wild. Glittering black eyes stared out from that chiseled face, ancient and inhuman. My badge slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers clattering to the floor. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. This was so far beyond anything I had expected, anything I thought I understood. What was this thing, this creature that could wear the skin of man or beast? Was it a spirit, a demon, something older and hungrier, and more terrible than I could possibly imagine? What are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice strangled. The man, the Skinwalker, smiled, a slash of white in the dark. When he spoke, his words were rust and gravel. "I am the hunter," he said, his eyes glinting with a cruel rapture. "The apex predator. I am the teeth in the dark, the claws in the night. I am the terror that stalks on silent paws. I am hunger and fear and death." He stepped closer, his movements liquid and hypnotic. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was rooted to the spot, transfixed by that merciless gaze. "I am as old as these woods," the Skinwalker continued, his voice dropping to a purr. I have hunted here since before your kind first crawled out of the mud, and I will be here long after the last human voice has faded from the earth." His hand shot out, faster than my eye could track, and grabbed me by the throat. He lifted me effortlessly off the ground until we were eye to eye. I clawed at his wrist, but it was like scrabbling at iron. "You are my gift," he hissed, his breath hot on my face. "My tribute. In marking you, I have ensured my own survival. You will feed my hunger. Forever." Horror crashed through me as I finally understood. The skinwalker needed fear and pain to sustain it, the way a lamprey needed blood. It had infected me, made me one of its own, so that it could glut itself on the suffering I would cause, on the lives I would destroy. I would be its instrument, its unwilling slave, until the end of my days. Despair welled up, black and crushing, and with it a surge of hopeless rage. No, I wouldn't let it end like this, wouldn't let this thing make me its pawn. If I was going to die, it would be on my own terms. It would be fighting. With the last of my fading strength, I lashed out with my foot, catching the skinwalker in the knee. I felt something pop and the creature's grip on my throat loosened. I wrenched myself free and dove for my dropped badge, snatching it up and thrusting it at the skinwalker's face like a cross before a vampire. The silver seared its skin and it jerked back with a sharp hiss. I pressed my advantage, slamming my shoulder into its chest and knocking it off balance. The skinwalker fell to the cave floor, and I pounced on it, holding the badge to its brow and gritting my teeth against the stink of burning flesh. The creature thrashed and howled beneath me, its features distorting grotesquely as it shifted between forms, caught halfway between man and beast. But I held on grimly, fueled by desperation and the implacable desire to end this, to sear this curse from my soul no matter the cost. Smoke billowed up from beneath my silver badge, thick and acrid, stinging my eyes and clogging my nose. The skinwalker's convulsions grew weaker and weaker, until finally it lay still, its body reverting fully to its human guise. I stumbled back, my head swimming, as the badge slipped from my fingers for the second time that night. And then, between one blink and the next, the skinwalker's body simply crumbled, collapsing in on itself like a sandcastle dissolving in the surf. It disintegrated into a fine black powder that sifted away on a breath of wind, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. For a moment I simply stood there, swaying on my feet as my brain struggled to process everything that had happened. It was over. The skinwalker was dead, destroyed by the purifying touch of silver. I stared down at my hands, half expecting to see the curse-born claws still sprouting from my fingertips. But they remained human, the same blunt, calloused fingers I'd always known. I felt lighter, somehow, as if an immense weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The miasma of fear and rage that had clouded my thoughts had evaporated like morning dew. I took a deep, shaky breath, marveling at the way the air seemed cleaner, crisper, and then, finally, I let myself feel the magnitude of what I'd done. I'd beaten the skinwalker. I'd beaten the monster. I don't remember much about the hike out of the woods. I have vague impressions of towering trees and dappled sunlight, of the cheerful gurgle of a stream and the distant cries of birds, but it all ran together in a kaleidoscopic blur, my mind lost in a fog of exhaustion and residual shock. My next clear memory is of stumbling out of the tree line and spotting my cabin downslope, rising out of a sea of waving grass like a beacon. At the sight of that weathered timber and tin roof of home, I felt my throat grow suddenly tight, my vision blurring with hot tears. I made my way down to the cabin in a daze, my feet carrying me of their own accord. But when I reached the porch, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I felt like a stranger in my own life, divorced from the man I'd been before this nightmare began. How could I possibly go back to my old routines, my old existence after everything I'd seen and done? The Ahanu who had left this place had been a different person, innocent of the shadows that lurked at the edges of the world. I didn't know if I could ever be him again, but what was the alternative? To let this experience break me, to let it define me? No, I refused to give the skinwalker that victory, even in death. Slowly, deliberately, I turned the knob. The cabin was dark and cool, the air slightly musty from disuse. Dust motes swirled in the thin bars of light that slanted through the windows. It looked exactly the same as I'd left it, as if the events of the last few days had been nothing but a fever dream. For a moment I simply stood there, breathing in the familiar smells of wood smoke and old books, letting the silence settle over me like a blanket. Then I stepped inside and shut the door firmly behind me. There were still questions to be answered, reports to file, people to notify about Jessica. There would be a reckoning, of that I had no doubt. But for now, I let the comfort of my little refuge enfold me, a shelter against the dark. I was safe. I was home. And no matter what else happened, I swore to myself that I would never forget the lessons I'd learned in the heart of the forest. The world was wider and wilder and more wondrous than I had ever dared imagine. Cruelty and horror, yes, but also strength and resilience beyond reckoning. I had walked through the valley of the shadow and emerged on the other side. Not unscathed, but perhaps a bit wiser, a bit stronger, and as I built a fire in the hearth and set a pot of coffee to brew, I felt a small tentative smile tug at the corners of my mouth. The future stretched out before me, unknown and unknowable, but I would meet it with my eyes open and my head held high. After all, I was a ranger. It's what we did. My name is Takayami, a name passed down from my Cherokee ancestors. I grew up in the backwoods of rural Appalachia, surrounded by towering oak and pine trees older than living memory. Hunting, fishing, hiking, the forest was my home and my life. But times were tough. The factory jobs had dried up and I was barely scraping by, living in my old beat-up truck. That's when I heard about the job, a caretaker position at a remote cabin deep in the Monongahela National Forest. Room and board provided, with plenty of solitude and fresh air. It seemed perfect for me, an escape from my troubles and a chance to save some money. I should have known it was too good to be true. The Forest Service ranger handed me the keys, a stack of firewood, some canned food, and a scratchy wool blanket. Last guy quit after a week, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. Said something in the woods was watching him. Cabin fever maybe, he shrugged. It gets awful lonely out there. No electricity neither. You still want the job? I nodded, trying to look unbothered, and loaded my meager possessions into the cabin's dusty interior. The ranger's mud-spattered truck rumbled off down the dirt road, leaving me in complete isolation. I stood on the sagging porch, breathing in the crisp pine-scented air tinged with a strange odor I couldn't place, something rank and rotten that made my nose twitch. That first night, the wind howled ceaselessly through the chinks in the rough-hewn log walls. Sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned in the narrow, lumpy cot, my mind conjuring dark images from the ranger's words. Something in the woods was watching. Outside the tiny window, the trees swayed and creaked like arthritic fingers tapping at the glass, scritching against the roof. I pulled the blanket over my head like I used to do as a scared child, waiting for dawn. Gray light seeped reluctantly into the cabin as the sun rose behind a thick bank of clouds. Dragging myself from the cot, I stumbled outside to the old well, drawing up a bucket of icy water to splash on my face and take a few long swallows to wet my dry mouth. The cold jolted me awake, cleared the cobwebs. I still felt unsettled, groggy from my sleepless night, and that strange smell hung heavy in the damp air. It seemed to emanate from the dense wall of trees behind the cabin. Probably some dead animal, I told myself, shaking off a shudder. After a meager breakfast of canned beans heated on the ancient wood stove, I girded myself to make a circuit of the property and surrounding woods, part of my daily caretaker duties. I laced up my sturdy boots, pulled on my thickest flannel, and a bright orange hunter's vest, and reached for my trusty Winchester rifle, a faithful companion on countless hunting trips with my father and grandfather. But as my fingers touched the cold metal, a wave of unease washed over me, raising the hairs on my arms under the thick flannel. Something felt wrong. Slowly, I lifted my eyes to the tree line. An unreasoning, primal terror gripped me, the instinctive fear of prey that feels the predator's gaze. There, between the dark trunks almost hidden in shadow, 2 points of sickly yellow light stared back at me, unblinking, unwavering, inhuman. Then they were gone, melting into the forest before I could be sure of what I'd seen. My heart thundered against my ribs and my breath came in ragged gasps as if I'd run for miles. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. You're jumping at shadows. But in my gut, I knew the truth. Those hadn't been the eyes of any animal I knew. The sour stench thickened as I moved cautiously into the trees, following the old deer trail behind the cabin. Rotted leaves squished beneath my boots, releasing puffs of noxious miasma. My eyes darted nervously, searching for a glimpse of sickly yellow between the pines, but I saw nothing. No squirrels chittering, no songbirds flitting through the branches. The forest was deathly silent except for my own ragged breathing. Even the wind had died. It felt like an eternity before I circled back to the cabin, but it could only have been an hour. I stumbled gratefully onto the porch, shrugging off my pack. I'd seen no signs of whatever foulness lurked in the forest. No tracks, no scat, no clues to identify the source of my unease. Only that pervasive, inescapable stench and a crawling sensation between my shoulder blades, the hair-raising certainty of being watched by some great, malevolent presence just beyond the edge of sight. Maybe it was time to cut my losses, leave this cursed job behind. Better to be broke than food for. No, I was being ridiculous, letting my imagination run wild like some wet-behind-the-ears city kid spooked by a few shadows and smells. Probably a bear kill I was smelling, I decided firmly. Well, this old country boy wouldn't be chased off by any bear. I was no soft greenhorn, but my new resolve lasted only as long as the fading light. As night crashed down, the noises began. At first I dismissed them as the usual sounds of the forest, owls hooting, animals rustling through the brush. Then came a whistling howl that froze the blood in my veins. It was like no animal I had ever heard, an otherworldly wail ringing from the darkness, a long wavering cry, undulating up and down as if in mocking imitation of human speech, and beneath it I thought I heard a guttural chanting in some ancient unknown language. The howling went on for hours, circling the cabin, drawing ever closer. I huddled on my cot, gripping the rifle, until utter exhaustion dragged me under and the nightmares began. I dreamed of dead things in the woods, skulls and bones hung with strips of rotting flesh, eye sockets seething with vile yellow light. Dreamed of dark forms lurking in shadow, pacing on too many legs, their movements jerky and unnatural. Of jagged teeth and wicked claws, and an ancient voice like grinding stone whispering forbidden secrets from the black void behind the stars. Secrets that would shatter a human mind if fully understood. I woke as the first light seeped into the cabin, my sweat-soaked union suit clinging to my shaking body. The morning brought no reprieve. The howling had faded, but a dreadful silence gripped the woods. Even the ever-present crows, nature's opportunists, made no sound. A sense of watchful anticipation hung in the air, the stillness of a crouched cat preparing to pounce. I stoked the dying embers in the stove, my hands hardly willing to obey me, managed to choke down a meager bit of jerky and hard biscuit. My head ached abominably, my thoughts sluggish and vague. Memories slipped away like minnows through grasping fingers. Why had I come to this place? Fleeting images of the world beyond the forest, honking cars, screaming sirens, a pretty girl's perfume, surfaced in my mind only to sink again into the mire of confusion. This cabin, this hateful forest, had become my entire existence. A shattering crash jolted me from my fugue. The cabin door burst inward, ripped from its rusted hinges, and in the opening stood a figure that stopped my heart. It had the shape of a man, but no man ever moved with such boneless fluidity. Tattered rags hung from its emaciated frame, and its face, dear God, its face, a hideous patchwork of animal skins crudely stitched together, all tooth and claw and matted fur. But worst were the eyes, glowing with sickly yellow fire in the daylight, seeing into the depths of my mind, my soul. I knew then that I looked upon a skinwalker, that dread creature of shamans and dark magic. Behind it, the trees seethed as if alive, whipping in a sudden frenzy. The stench of rot was overwhelming. The skinwalker took a jerky step into the cabin, its eyes never leaving mine as it lifted a long-fingered hand, and I began to scream. I have no clear memory of the events that followed. Fractured images kaleidoscoped through my mind, trees whipping against a storm-black sky, the meaty thud of a fist or claw impacting flesh, the Winchester bucking in my hands, fire, so much fire, the skinwalker shrieking as flames consumed it, the crackle and hiss of burning skin. When my senses returned, I lay curled on the packed dirt outside the cabin, or what was left of it. Only smoldering embers and a few blackened timbers remained. My orange hunting vest was torn and filthy, my boots gone. Blood, mine or the creature's, smeared my hands and spattered my clothes. At my feet lay a mound of greasy ash and charred bones. The Winchester was nowhere to be seen. Despite my injuries, a sense of profound relief washed over me. The skinwalker was dead, returned to whatever hell had spawned it. The unclean feeling, the sense of being watched by some vengeful spirit, had vanished along with that awful stench. Even the crows were back, raucously claiming their gory prize. With a pang I saw that the fire had consumed my pack along with the cabin and most of my possessions. The walkie-talkie was gone, but I was alive and blessedly sane. I didn't look back as I limped off through the trees, following the sun westward. In time I stumbled across a dirt maintenance road and from there made my way to an asphalt highway where a passing motorist picked me up. Told him I was a lost hiker, got turned around off trail, and he seemed to accept it, dosed up on his generosity with Christian spirit. I directed him to the nearest town and sheriff's station. The sheriff was a wrinkled old bird dog of a man, his face as creased as a walnut shell, and he had the damnedest accent I ever heard. But his eyes had seen things, hard things. When I described what happened at the cabin, he didn't scoff or call me crazy, just sighed and rubbed a hand over his stubbled chin. "I reckon you met the hungry one that walks on high ridges wearing tattered soles," he said finally. "The skinwalker, as you rightly called it. Thought we'd driven it off long ago, or maybe it finished with us, found easier prey. Reckon we was wrong. Gets more dangerous the more fear it smells. He shook his head, a shadow in his eyes. 'Twas bad medicine brought that thing into the world, and worse that keeps it. Old magic. Dark magic. He turned to spit into a dented coffee can. Best we can do is keep the fire hot and the shot and iron close to hand. Worked for my daddy's daddy and his, and before that, I spent 2 days recovering in the local clinic before I felt ready to travel. My mysterious savior, bless his heart, left me a clean set of clothes and enough money for a bus ticket. As I stepped off the Greyhound in my hometown bus station, breathing in the mingled smells of diesel and stale cigarette smoke, I felt the invisible bands constricting my chest begin to loosen. The terror of the last weeks, the skinwalker's hideous face, the endless nightmares, they all started to feel distant, fading like a half-remembered late-night movie. But even if what happened in those woods was just a fever dream, a hallucination, the product of isolation and imagination, it had given me a new perspective. The old problems that had driven me into the wild, that once seemed so overwhelming, the loneliness, the bills, the sense that the world was moving on without me, now felt small, manageable. After facing down a storybook monster, I could handle anything Nashville decided to throw at me. I was alive, and I was home, and that was enough. I never saw the Forest Service ranger again, and never went back for the pittance the government owed me. But I did make one stop before I hightailed it back to my old life, a visit to the Cherokee Reservation where the last of my father's people still lived. I described my experience to an elder there, a medicine man well-versed in the old stories. He nodded sagely as I told my tale, that same shadow in his eyes that I'd seen in the old sheriff's. The skinwalker is a powerful spirit, he said, his voice dry as crumbling leaves. A corrupt shaman who uses the dark arts to transform into an animal. It gains power from fear, grows stronger and more twisted the more terror it creates. He regarded me with eyes black as obsidian. Few men face this evil and live. But remember this, the skinwalker may walk between worlds, but it is a lonely path, cut off from the land of the living and the dead. You are more than it will ever be. You belong. I nodded, unable to speak around the sudden lump in my throat, and clasped his hand in gratitude. As I walked out into the dusty reservation street, I fancied I could smell the sharp, clean scent of pine needles beneath the hot asphalt, but whether memory or message, I couldn't say. I climbed into my beat-up truck, the one constant in my vagabond life, and pointed it toward the lights of the city. In the rearview mirror, the forest receded until it was lost in the distance, and the dark spaces between the trees held no yellow eyes, no ancient evil waiting to swallow me whole. I was a child of the earth and the sky, and I would never again let fear rule my path. I was going home.